we're going to look at this video Ben Media is sending us to kick us off with our Ukraine Day. For those of you just showing up, we're doing a special feature today. We're not doing the news. We're going through the Ukraine resource doc just to have it in video form. So, we've got this to cut us, or to start us off.
An Polen in der Westukraine, durchgeführt von den
Ja,
Bandera.
und es gab auch auf gleiche Weise die gleichen Massaker der Polen gegenüber der Ukraine. Auch Zehntausende
Macht ja
Ukrainer,
nichts besser.
Zehntausende Ukrainer wurden, das war ein Krieg. Und deswegen, das wollen jetzt die Polen, also diese Geschichte politisieren. Wir sind dagegen.
Aber hat Israel Unrecht? Israel, der Staat Israel,
Ja,
das
wir haben-
800.000
ja.
wurden auch von Banderas Truppen und Bandera
Israel,
Denken
was
Sie
heißt,
sich das aus?
ich weiß nicht, was sie sich ausdenken, aber wir reden über Bandera, ja? Und wir reden über
Ohne Scheiß, die
Bandera.
ganze Welt erkennt an, dass Bandera an der Ermordung von hunderttausenden Juden beteiligt ist.
Nein, das stimmt
Außer
nicht.
die Ukraine.
Es gibt keine Belege, dass Bandera-Truppen hunderttausende Juden ermordet haben. Es gibt keine Belege. Das ist diese Narrative, dass die Russen bis heute durchsetzen und das in Deutschland und auch in Polen und in Israel auch Unterstützung
Denken
findet.
sich die jüdischen Gemeinden das alle aus?
Ich weiß nicht, woher sie diese Daten nehmen, aber ich bin bereit, auch mit den jüdischen Gemeinden darüber sachlich zu reden, wenn sie wirklich nicht nur das wiederholen, was wir seit Jahrzehnten hören. Bandera ist...
Es gab Flugblätter, als die Deutschen reingekommen sind nach
Ja.
Lviv. Da hieß es, Volk, das musst du wissen. Moskowiten, Polen, Ungarn und Juden, sie sind deine Feinde, vernichte sie. Das musst du wissen. Deine Führung, dein Führer Stepan Bandera.
Was für Flugblätter?
Als die Deutschen gerade einmarschiert sind, da haben sie quasi an die Bevölkerung das verteilt, die ja noch unter anderer Herrschaft dann da waren. Die haben sich ja mit den Deutschen verbrüdert. Das ist doch ganz klar.
Also,
Und ich frage mich halt, ich verstehe...
also ich werde
André.
dir heute nicht sagen, dass ich mich davon distanziere. Und das war's. Ja.
Das,
Und
das,
war-
das, das ist ja deine Entscheidung. Ich
Ja,
frag
das
mich
ist meine
nur-
Entscheidung
ich-
und
ich
das
frag-
kannst
ich
du
frag-
nicht verstehen, aber weil
Nee, ich verstehe nicht,
Ja.
wie man jemanden als Helden bezeichnen kann, der gleichzeitig Massenmörder von Juden und Polen war.
Bandera war kein Massenmörder von Juden und Polen. Er war kein Massenmörder.
That was crazy. But, you know, in line with what we can expect today that we're hearing from. So, the context for this video, for anybody ready to get into this. So, this was the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Andriy Melnik, who was the ambassador to Germany, and then now is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine. Well, was in 2023 when this was posted. I'm not sure if he still is actually, but, you know, was promoted to this position. So who he's talking about is this guy, Stepan Bandera, and we're going to hear a lot about Stepan Bandera today. Stepan Bandera was a nationalist in Ukraine who was so extreme that he had to splinter off from the other Ukrainian nationalists and start his own nationalist group. And when World War II happened, he wrote to Hitler, and he was like, come do that in Ukraine. We'll help. My new group, OUNB. The OUN was the original Ukrainian nationalist group. His was OUNB, B for Bandera. He's like, we'll help. And they did. His group of people helped murder hundreds of thousands. I think conservative estimates are like 100,000. So, you know, you could say tens of thousands if you wanted to be super conservative about it. But many ethnic minorities in Ukraine. And Ukraine actually had the highest rates of casualties from the Holocaust out of any country that experienced it. And some historians think that it is explicitly because of this one man, Stepan Bandera. Now, Stepan Bandera, I'm going to show you guys to get started. The new government of Ukraine that took over, I'm going to give you a little backstory, but basically in 2013, 2014, there was a coup by a group of right-wing fascists who took over control of Ukraine. And they built statues honoring this man, Stepan Bandera, and decided to brand him as a national hero, this Nazi. And I'm going to show you this. This is a map. 42 monuments were built to Stepan Bandera in recent years. And these are them all in Western Ukraine, honoring that man that they were just talking about, who said, you know, Hitler, come here, do the Holocaust. Let's kill a bunch of minorities. Hello from Dave Legend. Hello, everybody. You're here for a good one today. We're going to be talking about in depth about Ukraine and Russia. Oh, Opsis, thank you for the gifted subs. Yay! I'm so glad you guys are here for this. I think this will be a good one. So we're getting into some Ukraine, some Nazis, some Ukrainian Nazis. We're going to be talking about them today. We pulled up the map of the Bandera monuments, so that's how you know we're off to a real fucked start, right? So, yeah. Hi, Julia. Welcome. You know, they're just literally building statues honoring this guy. They're just like, yeah, fuck it. We love him. And it's pretty gnarly. And you're going to hear his name mentioned today as we go through the document. So, does he look like your cousin? Well, let's pull him up for everybody to see. You're going to see this face a lot. People are obsessed with this man. He's real. He looks like that. He looks like exactly what you would think, I think. I think he really has that look about him. So whenever you're talking to somebody who's seems a little weird about Ukraine, ask them if Stepan Bandera was a Nazi. Because normal people will be like, yes. And Nazis will be like, no, he was a brave Ukrainian hero. So that's how you know you're talking to a Nazi. So there's your shortcut. Okay? Yeah, you tell he's real mad at something. Wait, what? Bandera's grandson lives in your city? His name is Steve Bandera? Wait, are you serious? That's crazy. Julia, that's wild. Wow. Oh my god, wait. I don't follow Julia on here. Do you guys all follow Julia? Have we done everybody follow Julia? Do I follow Julia? Maybe I already do. Maybe I just never see when her stream pops up. ADHD. Do I? He writes articles about how his grandpa wasn't a Nazi. Join us and follow Julia. Oh, I already did. I did. My bad. Well, I'm very mad that I don't see your streams pop up, I guess. So that's a me problem, not a you problem. Okay. Is there a delay for you guys? No, I don't think there's a delay. I think it's okay. All right. So this is what I always say too. Somebody in the chat is like, Ukraine has a Nazi history. There's no point in denying it. And this is how I feel as an American. Are you guys seeing this delay in the video? I can restart it if you're guys seeing the delay. Is it weird from the audio? There's no video. Interesting. Okay, let me restart this for you guys. Hold on. Hold, please. That's looking weird for me. Okay, can you see me now? It looks like it's better now. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to be talking about these Ukrainians today. And like I said, as an American, there's no utility in me pretending like my country doesn't have a white supremacy problem, isn't full of fucking Nazis, isn't full of right-wing freaks. Like, this is very normal for me to acknowledge, right? I think a lot of us come from countries that are fucked and have done fucked things and continue to do fucked things. So the question is, why are Ukrainians so resistant to understanding this, right? This is where it doesn't really make sense to me. Like, what benefit do you get in denying the fact that fucked up things are happening in your country? And we know not every Ukrainian denies this, because we know there are Ukrainian socialists who have literally been imprisoned for their beliefs and for speaking out about this, which is very, very sad. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go as far down into the document on Ukraine as we can. And this is a document from my Linktree. So you guys can access it and follow it along with me if you would like. And we're going to just start at the top and we're going to work our way down and we're going to learn about this together. And this is going to exist obviously as a resource in video form, or you can reference it to people if you would like. So with that, let's get in to Ukraine and Russia. Now, I want to start off by saying that there is a podcast episode about this content on my podcast, Pick Me Up, I'm Scared. There's 8 hours of content about this that goes into a lot of detail. This resource document is not the same sources I use for my podcast. My podcast is more history-based. This is more opinion, like some opinion stuff gets shared in here, some analysis. It's more current events-y. So you will get a little bit different info from this than the podcast, but there is going to be some overlap as well. So if you want more historical background, we go into more detail on the podcast probably. So starting off, the first thing I recommend people read is actually this book that we're not going to be able to go over any of the books today, but I also have an interview with the author of the book that we will be able to go over. So this is on archive.org, and this book is called Old Nazis, The New Right, and the Republican Party. It's loading. You guys know I have cursed Spectrum internet. Now, this book does actually work, I promise. And it is by a man named Russ Belland. So when this book came out, it was so influential that people in the Republican Party had to quit their jobs. It was under the Reagan campaign, I believe, when he was running for president. And some of them were Ukrainian nationals. I know, it's loading. It is loading like 1998. Wow, I wonder if I should just like restart. Oh yeah, now it works. Okay, so here's the book. So we're not going to be able to read anything from this book, but this is additional reading that is interesting. It doesn't just deal with Ukraine. It deals with a lot of countries, but there's a lot about Ukraine in here. And basically what it talks about is how the United States, after World War II, brought Nazis into the USA and made them into special ethnic councils. And then how the Reagan administration in particular took advantage of them to secure political power for the Republican Party, and also formalized them and made them have more political power in general and more of a role in our government going forward. So this is kind of what this talks about. It's a very, very good book. The National Republican Heritage Groups Council is what came out of this. So, you know, they have ones on anti-Semitism. They have Axis allies and apologists, you know, friends of dictatorship, ethnic realignment, forgive and forget, you know, all these weird groups, etc. So existed under here, great chapters, really recommend it. Because we're not going to be able to read that book today, we do have this interview with the author of the book. And we will talk about this. So this is 7 Decades of Nazi Collaboration, America's Dirty Little Secret in Ukraine. An interview with Russ Belland, author of Old Nazis, The New Right, and the Republican Party. And this came out in 2014, in March of 2014. So right after a coup happened in Ukraine that we will discuss. So the author says, as the Ukrainian crisis has unfolded over the past few weeks, it's hard for Americans not to see Vladimir Putin as a big villain. But the history of the region is a history of competing villains, vying against one another. And one school of villains, the Nazis, have a long history of engagement with the U.S., mostly below the radar, but occasionally exposed, as they were by Russ Belland in his book Old Nazis, The New Right, and the Republican Party. Belland's exposure of Nazi leaders from German allies in the 1988 Bush presidential campaign. Oh, it was Bush, not Reagan. Sorry, my bad. Did I type this right here? Yes, I said Bush. Okay, I said Reagan, but I wrote Bush. Bush presidential campaign was the driving force in the announced resignation of 9 individuals, 2 of them from Ukraine, which is why he was the logical choice to turn to illuminate the scattered mentions of Nazi and fascist elements amongst the Ukrainian nationalists, which somehow never seemed to warrant further comment or explanation. Of course, most Ukrainians aren't Nazis or fascists, all the more reason to illuminate those who would hide their true natures in the shadows, or even behind the momentary glare of the spotlight. Now, something I think is really interesting, you know, liberals are always like, why don't you attack Republicans? Why don't you attack Republicans? But when we talk about the neo-Nazi problem in Ukraine, that has been facilitated by the Republican Party. That is us critiquing Republicans. But liberals don't want to hear that because they have the same foreign policy as Republicans when it comes to Ukraine, which I think is just very interesting to point out, right? So the interviewer says, your book, Old Nazis, The New Right, and the Republican Party, exposed the deep involvement of the Republican Party of Nazi elements from Central and Eastern Europe, including Ukrainian, dating back to World War II and even before. As the Ukrainian crisis unfolded in the last few weeks, there have been scattered mentions of a fascist or neo-fascist element. Remember, this is brand new. This is like as it's happening, that the coup is going on. So they're like, what's going on? People are piecing it together, figuring it out. But somehow that never seems to warrant further comment or explanation. I can't think of anyone better to shed light on what's not being said about that element. The danger of Russian belligerence is increasingly obvious. Yeah, that framing is a little whatever. But this unexamined fascist element poses dangers of its own. What can you tell us about this element and those dangers? Now, before we get into this, it's going to be mostly about Ukraine. It's not going to be about Russia. People always ask me my opinions about Russia. I'm going to tell you, I don't have particularly strong feelings about Russia. Russia, obviously not a Marxist-Leninist country. But their second largest political party is Marxist-Leninist, and they do have some influence and sway over things. We see Russia show up in the court of anti-imperialism in strong ways. They're obviously helping Cuba. We think that is good. They helped Venezuela not get couped in the past during the first Trump presidency. I thought that was good. And my thing that I generally like to say is I'm not here to moralize Russia. Russia is a very normal capitalist country to me. Maybe even better than the average capitalist country because of the help they lend to communists, to Marxist-Leninists, right? And because of the influence the Marxist-Leninists have there. However, people ask you, do you think Putin's a good guy? That is not how I think about politics, right? That's not how I think about politics. There are some things I will moralize. I think Nazis are bad. That's a pretty baseline moralization. However, my kind of approach to Russia in understanding Russia in this whole war, this whole conflict, is Russia acting rationally? Are they a rational actor? And Russia in this situation, I think, is a rational actor. Now, you can talk about the morality and ethics of war. I think we all know war is bad. But when I say Russia is a rational actor, what I mean is they tried to negotiate to avoid war. They tried not to go to war for many, many years. And they warned this course of action, if maintained, starting as early as the 1990s. They warned this would lead to a war. So, I think that's a kind of lens through which I personally view Russia. I'm coming into Big Gotko. Why would he lie? Wait. Oh, you're talking about Khrushchev. So, just if you come to this and you're more liberal-minded and you want me to demonize Russia, I'm not going to do that. I'm pretty normal about Russia. Russia does some stuff I like. They do some stuff I don't like. It's not a big deal to me. They are operating the same way as any other entity forced to engage in realpolitik on the global stage. If you come to me and you're like, but in the war, Russia did a war crime. Yes, war crimes happen on every single side, even people I like, and they're just somebody I'm neutral on. War crimes happen on every single side because war is bad. So I'm always going to side with people who tried to avoid war at all costs unless it was a revolutionary war of some kind, right? So, yes, Russia has done bad things in the war. That is very true. Ukraine has also done bad things in the war. That is very true. Yes, you can say it's not ideal that Russia decided to declare war on Ukraine, but the thing I always come back to is that rationally, I cannot think of what they were supposed to do outside of that. Maybe you're more creative than me. Maybe you would be better at leading a country than I would hypothetically in my mind. Maybe you have all sorts of ideas about what Russia should have done instead. That's awesome. Feel free to share them. I wasn't able to come up with them on my own, so that's where I am with the Russia thing. So that's all I'm going to say about the moralizing of Putin and Russia before we get into this. Now, getting into the question, the danger of Russian belligerence, again, I kind of feel like it's American belligerence in the region, and all these countries are forced with their back against the wall to react to it, but okay, whatever. This unexamined fascist element poses dangers of its own. What can you tell us about this element and these dangers? So the author says, the element has a long history, a long record that speaks for itself. When that record is actually known and elaborated on, the key organization in the coup that took place here recently was the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the OUN, and a specific branch known as the Banderas, the OUNB. And that is who the video we watched at the beginning, who that guy was talking about in German, B. Bandera. They're the group behind the Svoboda Party, which got a number of key positions in the new interim regime. The OUN goes back to the 1920s when they split off from other groups and, especially in the 1930s, began a campaign of assassinating and otherwise terrorizing people who don't agree with them. As World War II approached, they made an alliance with the Nazi powers. They formed several military formations, so that when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June of 1941, they had several battalions that went into the main city at the time where their base was. Lvov or Lwów, or it has a variety of spellings, also Lviv. I don't know how to pronounce this. I always just call it Lviv. That's probably wrong. They went in, and there's documented history of them participating in the identification and rounding up of Jews in the city and assisting in executing several thousand citizens almost immediately. They were also involved in liquidating Polish group populations with other parts of Ukraine during the war. So, justice for Poland? Yeah, here, against Ukrainian nationalists. Without getting deeply involved in that whole history, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists to this day defend their wartime role, just like we saw that guy do, right? He was like, but these people killed hundreds of thousands of people. And he's like, well, I'm not changing my position on it. And this is what Russ Ballin's talking about here. They were backers of forming the 14th Waffen-SS Division, which was the all-Ukrainian division that became an armed element on behalf of the Germans and under overall German control. They helped encourage its formation, and right after the war, right at the end of the war, it was called the 1st Ukrainian Division, and they still glorify that history of the SS Division. And they have a veterans organization that obviously doesn't have too many members left, but they formed a veteran division of that. If you look at the insignia being worn in Kiev, and the street demonstrations and marches to the SS Division insignia still being worn. In fact, I was looking at photographs last night, and there was a whole formation marching, not with the 14th Division, but under the 2nd Division. It was a large division that did major battles around Ukraine, and these marchers were wearing the insignia of the armbands of the 2nd Division. This is of Nazis. So, the coup that happened in 2013-2014, what Russ Bellins is saying is they were followers and practitioners of the same organization set up during this time by Stepan Bandera and his organization, the OUNB, who worked with the Nazis. So this is very clear. And the OUN, even in its post-war publications, has called for ethnogenetically pure Ukrainian territory, which of course is simply calling for purging Jews and Poles and Russians from what they consider Ukrainian territory. Also, current leaders of Svoboda have made blatantly anti-Semitic remarks that call for getting rid of Muscovite Jews and so forth. They use this coarse, threatening language that anybody knowing the history of World War II would tremble at. If they were living here, it would seem like they would start worrying about it. Obviously, these people don't hold monopoly power in Ukraine, but they stepped up, and the United States has been behind the Svoboda Party and these Ukrainian nationalists. In fact, the U.S. connections to them go back to World War II, and the United States has a long-standing tie to the OUN, through the intelligence agencies, initially military intelligence, and later, the CIA. So when a liberal is like, everything you don't like is in the CIA, most of the time it actually is. Most of the time. Oh, hydrate. I see your hydrates, chat. I see your hydrates. Ah! I am drowning. I am dying. Okay. I also have the intense oral injury again. I'm on painkillers for it right now. Okay. We don't have a lot of time though. We got so much to get through today. So let's get back into it. Okay. So yeah, I'm on 2 Advils. I'm high as shit, guys. That's the other thing they say is that you're on drugs all the time if you're a communist. You're either on drugs, you're in a manic episode if you're a lady, you're out of your mind, you're insane, and you have narcissistic personality disorder because you're centering yourself. That's what they always tell us. Yeah, my blood's gonna get real red. No more brown blood from me. So the interviewer says, your book discusses a central figure in the OUN, Yaroslav Stetsko, who was politically active for decades here in America. What can you tell us about his history? Yaroslav Stetsko was the number 2 leader of the OUN during World War II and thereafter. In 1959, Stefan Bandera, who was the head of the OUN, was killed by the USSR. I know, we did it. We communists, we did a good thing. We found him. He was trying to hide, and we were like, So, yes. Okay. So Stetsko then assumed leadership. So Stetsko in 1941 was the guy who actually marched into Lviv with the German army on June 30th, 1941. Whoever said during Pride Month? During Pride Month. And the OUN issued a proclamation at the time under his name, praising and calling for glory to the German leader Adolf Hitler, and said how they're going to march arm in arm for Ukraine and so forth. After the war, he was part of the key leadership that got picked up by the Americans. So again, in case there's any confusion, these are Nazis. Stepan Bandera is a Nazi. We are talking about Nazis. There's a number of accounts I've seen, at least 3 credible reports on how they were displaced in the displaced person camp. The Allied forces set up displaced person camps and picked up tens of thousands of these former allies of Hitler's from countries all over the East, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania. There weren't Polish collaborators. I think most people know the Germans heavily persecuted and murdered millions of Polish residents, but Bulgaria, Romania, Croatia, so forth, Belarus. So basically what he's talking about is that at the end of the World War II, there were these camps set up by like the United States, basically. And it was a bunch of people who'd been Nazis, worked with Nazis, Nazi collaborators. And so that's what they're talking about. Former allies of Hitler from all these countries all over, put in these displaced persons camps where they're like, what do we do with you now? They had them in these camps they built and organized them where the Ukrainians were assassinating their Ukrainian nationalist rivals, so they would get to be the undisputed leaders of the Ukrainian nationalist movements. So then they would get the sponsorship of the United States to continue their political operation. And they were successful in that regard. So basically the United States set up all these camps, and then they would bring the leaders of these groups who'd worked with the Nazis into the United States and allow them to be a political organization in the United States of former Nazi allies, Nazis and Nazi allies, but who were said to represent the ethnic group they came from. So, for example, they would take Croatian Nazis, put them in a camp, and be like, okay, you guys all worked with Nazi Germany. You're basically Croatian Nazis. The Croatian Nazis would fucking battle dome it, right? And only the strongest would survive. And whoever was left, the United States would be like, cool, you guys are now coming to the United States, and you are the Association of the Croatian Freedom Fighter Federation, whatever the fuck they wanted to call it. Okay, I just made that up. And they'd bring them here, and then they would have political influence as being members of this community, right? And nobody would talk about the fact that they were fucking Nazi collaborators, right? So this is what they were doing. Yeah. You feel like this might line up with the list of people that disliked communism, Autistic Betty 3? Yeah, I think you might be right. So this is what they would do. And then the United States would sponsor them, bring them to the USA where they could continue their political work. So when Bandera was out of the picture, because he was killed in 1959, Stetsko became the undisputed leader of the nationalists in Ukraine. The Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists in 1943, under German sponsorship, organized a multinational force to fight on behalf of the retreating German army. After the Battle of Stalingrad in 43, the Germans felt a heightened need to get more allies, and so the Romanian Iron Guard, the Hungarian Arrow Cross, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, and others with military formations came to assist and formed the united front called the Committee of Subjugated Nations and agreed to work on behalf of the German military. In 1946, they renamed it the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations, ABN. So in case there was any confusion about who the Nazis were trying to fight, the Nazis were an anti-Bolshevik bloc, right? They were fighting the communists. Stetsko was the leader of that until he died in 1986. I mention this in part because the OUN tries to say, well, during the war, we fought the Germans and the communists. The fact of the matter is that they were the leadership of this whole multinational alliance on behalf of the Germans the last 2 years of the war and in the war thereafter. All the post-war leaders of the unrepentant Nazi allies were all under the leadership of Yaroslav Stetsko from the OUMB, where he was Bandera's right-hand man, okay? So, what happened when Stetsko and others like him from other German allied forces came to the United States? Well, in the United States, when they came, his groups organized captive nations committees, and they became supposedly the representatives of the people who were being oppressed in Eastern Europe, the Baltic countries, by the Soviets. So when we talk about the anti-communists weren't all Nazis, they literally were Nazis. Like, they were literally Nazis brought to the United States to talk about how their people were being oppressed by the USSR. Literally. Like, literally. This is them. So they were, in fact, being given an uncritical blank check to represent the voices of all of those nations that were part of the Warsaw Pact, when in fact they represented the most extreme elements of the nationalist committees. So this is crazy, right? Yeah, this book is amazing. So if you really think about this, why do you hear so much that communism was evil? Communism was evil. My family lived in communism. They hated it. Well, literally because we brought a bunch of fucking Nazis over here from those countries, and we were like, hey, here's a microphone and a podium. Why don't you tell everybody how fucked up you thought communism was? They were literal Nazis. Yeah. The Captive Nations Committee in Washington, D.C., for instance, was run by the person who headed the Ukrainian Organization of Nationalists. That's the OUN. This was true in the number of places as well. In my hometown area near Detroit, they played a major role. In the early 50s, they were resettled in the United States. There was at least 10,000 of them that came and resettled. When you look at all the nationalities, they became politically active through the Republican National Committee because it was really the Eisenhower administration that made the policy decision in the early 1950s to bring them in. They set up these campaign organizations every 4 years, and they would mobilize for the Republican candidates, whoever it would be, and some of them like Richard Nixon in 1960, and actually had close direct ties with some of the leaders like the Romanian Iron Guard and some other groups. You're thinking we could probably vote to fix Ukraine? When Richard Nixon ran for president in 1968, he made a promise to these leaders that if he won the presidency, he would make them the ethnic outreach arm of the Republican National Committee on a permanent basis. So they wouldn't be a quadrennial presence, but a continuing presence in the Republican Party. So sometimes I misremember which Republican president this was. You might have heard me misattribute this to Reagan, and I'm so sorry if I ever did that in the past. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I did. Because I know I accidentally said Reagan earlier, but it was Richard Nixon. And he made the promise through a guy named Laszlo Pastor, who served 5 years in prison after World War II for crimes against humanity. He was prosecuted in 1946 by a non-communist government that actually had control of Hungary at the time. There was a period from 45 to 48 when the Hungarian Communist Party didn't run Hungary. They were the ones who prosecuted him. He had served as a liaison between the Hungarian Nazi Party and Berlin. So just in case you think communists are all making this up, no. Non-communists in Hungary were also like, yeah, fuck these people. He served in the Berlin embassy of the Hungarian Arrow Cross movement. This is the guy that got picked to organize all of the ethnic groups, and the only people that got brought in were the Nazi collaborators. They didn't have a Russian affiliate because they hated Russians of all political stripes. There were no African Americans or Jewish affiliates either. It was just composed of these elements. It was literally just like Eastern European Nazis. And for a while they had German affiliate, but some exposure of the Nazi character of the German affiliate caused it to be quietly removed. But the other Nazis just got to stay. Now, the questioner says, your book was researched and published in the 1980s. What was happening by that point in time after these groups had been established for more than a decade? And Russ Balance says, I went to their meetings in the 1980s, and they put out materials that really make clear who they were. In 1984, one of their booklets praised the pro-Nazi Ustashi regime in Croatia. And these Ustashi killed an estimated 750,000 people and burned them alive in their own camp in Croatia. And now, if you listen to my podcast episode on Yugoslavia, we get into this a lot, so this is not new to you. If you aren't so sure about the Ustashi and you want to learn more about this, pick me up, I'm Scared's my podcast, and we have a 4-episode deep dive into Yugoslavia that covers this. And here they are, praising the founding of this regime, acknowledging that it was associated with the Nazis, and it was signed by the chairman of the Republican National Committee. You can't make this stuff up. It is just crazy. I interviewed the Cossack guy, and he showed me his pension from service in the SS in World War II, and how he was affiliated with free Nazi groups in the United States, and he was just very unrepentant. These are the umbrellas that were called captive nation committees by these people that Stetsko was over and was part of too. The Reagan White House brought him in, so this is where my Reagan thing might have got confused, and promoted him as a major leader and did a big dinner. UN Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick was part of it, George Bush as vice president, and of course Reagan, and Stetsko was there being held up as some great leader. And proclamations were issued on his behalf. Again, Stetsko, the guy who was the second in command of the OUMB, which worked with Nazi Germany to kill a bunch of ethnic minorities in Ukraine. When Bush was running for president in 1988, Bush Sr., he came to these basically one of the leading locations of the Ukrainian nationalists in North America, which is just outside of Detroit, a suburb of Detroit, of their cultural center. And one of their foremost leaders in the world is headquartered out there at the time. He got Bush to come, and they denounced the OSI, and Bush just shook his head. He wouldn't say anything about it. Well, the OSI was the Offices of Special Investigations. It was investigating the presence of Nazi war criminals in the United States and deporting those who were found to have lied on their history when they applied to come here after the war. They deported a number of people from all over the U.S. They had a lot of open investigations, and all these immigrant Nazis were trying to bring all these political pressure they could to stop the investigations, including the Ukrainian nationalist ones. So they denounced them, the OSI investigations, in front of Bush. They were like, yeah, how dare you try to, deport immigrants who were Nazis. What the fuck? How dare you try to deport people for being Nazis? And Bush just nods his head, and he doesn't say anything. Because he doesn't want to look like he's sympathetic to the Nazi war criminals, but he also doesn't want to offend them, right? So he's just like, okay, interesting. So at the time, World War II was still being played out over 4 decades later in the politics of the presidency. And unfortunately, Bush and Reagan continued to be on the side that we tried to defeat in World War II. They're still on the side of the Nazis. So the interviewer says, what was the response when your book came out with all this information? How was it received? And he says, prior to the book's publication, Washington Jewish Week had done a story about some of the ethnic leaders of the Bush campaign and their history, like denying the Holocaust or being involved with these immigrant Nazi groups. They named a couple of them that weren't part of the Heritage Groups Council, but they were part of the Bush campaign. When I published the book, it brought a lot more names, and the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Boston Globe did stories on them. It got to the point where the reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer would call them about one of their ethnic leaders in the Bush campaign. The standard response was that he's no longer part of it. They'd say it almost as soon as the name got mentioned. So when they would call that person, I'll give you an example. Florian Galdau, he ran the Romanian Iron Guard in New York City. He had a wartime record. Traifa himself was implicated in the mass killings of Jews in Bucharest in 1941. Galdau's record is clear because when Traifa was prosecuted, he was one of the people targeted by the OSI, and he was forced into deportation in the 1980s. But in those records, they identify Florian Galdau as one of his operatives. So his history is known, except apparently to the Bush campaign. So when he was identified by the Philadelphia Inquirer, they immediately said he wasn't part of it. So then the Philadelphia Inquirer calls Florian Galdau, and he says, no, I'm a part of it. They never said anything to me. As far as I know, I'm still part of the campaign. And that was the pattern. The Republican National Committee said after the election, they were going to put a blue ribbon committee together to do an investigation of the charges in my book. I was never contacted. Nobody affiliated with the book project. The publisher wasn't contacted. None of the sources I ever worked with were contacted. And after about a year with nobody raising any issues or questions about it, they just folded it up and said, well, we don't have the resources to look into it. So they talk a little bit more about the fallout of the book, which isn't super, super relevant to us. But again, this is on my resource doc if you want to read the entire thing. So what we get into here that's more interesting is about the 2004 Orange Revolution. Once the OUN got sponsored by the American security establishment intelligence agencies, they were embedded in a variety of ways in Europe as well, like Radio Free Europe, which is headquartered in Munich, which we all know Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, that's part of the USAGM, the US Agency for Global Media. I also have a podcast episode about that. That's a deep dive. If you guys want to hear on that, USAGM, also pick me up, I'm scared. But basically that's our above board, congressionally funded propaganda network, and Radio Free Europe's a part of it. From there, they ran various kinds of operations where they were trying to do work inside the Warsaw Pact countries. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, a number of them moved back into the Ukraine as well, as the other respective countries and began setting up operations there and organizing political parties. For those of you who are a little bit younger, the Ukraine used to be what people conventionally called Ukraine. I guess considered an offensive term now because it implies you think it's a region of Russia. So this is not something we would usually say. We would usually just say Ukraine now, but there's a precedent for why he says that. So I just wanted to give that context. They reconstituted veteran groups of the Waffen-SS. They held marches in the 1990s in the Ukraine and organized political parties in alliance with the United States and became part of what was called the Orange Revolution in 2004 when they won the election there. So we're going to talk about that. So the United States, he's saying the United States won the election in Ukraine in 2004, and we'll get into what that means. The prime minister was closely allied with them. They worked with the new government to get veterans benefits for Ukrainian SS division veterans, Nazis, and they started establishing the statues and memorials and museums for Stepan Bandera. So remember that map I showed you at the beginning of the 40 some odd statues built honoring Stepan Bandera? Well, I believe 4 of them were built after the 2004 Orange Revolution, the first coup attempt that the United States had in Ukraine, in my lifetime anyway. And the rest were built after the 2014 one. So also important context to have for the timing here. So after 2004, that's when they really started to build statues and memorials and museums for Stepan Bandera, who was the leader of the OUN, and who I should say was despised by other Ukrainian nationalists because of their methods, because they were so extreme and violent towards other Ukrainian nationalist groups as well. So this is actually true. Bandera was hated by other right-wingers because the OUNB would kill other right-wingers who they thought weren't extreme enough for them. They were very, very insane. At what point is someone no longer a Nazi and is considered a neo-Nazi? I think if you literally collaborated with the Nazis, you're a Nazi. But if you were born too late for that, you're a neo-Nazi, is how I usually think that. That's kind of, yeah, the timing is what I do. So, Bandera was not a universal hero, but this group was so influential in part because of its U.S. connections that if you go online and you Google Lviv and the word Bandera, you'll see monuments and statues and large posters and banners of Bandera's likeness and large monuments, permanently erected monuments on behalf of Bandera. So they made this guy like he's the George Washington of Ukraine. He's a Nazi. And that government was in power until 2010, when there was another election and a new regime was elected with a lot of support from the East. Ukrainian nationalist groupings around the Orange Revolution were sharply divided against each other, and there was rampant corruption, so people voted them out. So 2010, you guys have probably heard me say, up until 2009, people in Ukraine had pretty favorable views of Russia. And people don't want to hear that, but I'm going to show you guys a document. Now, the reason why this changed in 2010 is that when the American-backed people got ousted from power, the United States was like, oh, fuck. We got to go in and spend a lot more money here. So in 2010, the United States started dumping a lot of funding via the National Endowment for Democracy into Ukraine to try to control the narrative and basically turn these people against their... Sorry, I'm looking for this doc. Against the Russians. So this was a massive propaganda campaign, basically, going on there. I'm looking for this. Okay. So this is a Pew poll from 2009 and view of Russia's influence on the country. In 2009, Ukraine, 46% of people in Ukraine said Russia was a good influence on their country. Only 25% said it was bad. Right? So this idea that Ukrainians hated Russia, always hated Russia, this is a deep-seated hatred going back forever, you wouldn't understand. Every Ukrainian is bound to hate Russia because Russia was so bad to Ukraine. No. In 2009, 46% of Ukrainians say that Russia was a good influence on their country. Only 25% it was bad. 20% said both, and 9% like, I don't know. That's really high. That's really high. Ukrainians had a good view of Russia. And that is why in 2010, the American-backed candidates were voted out, and that's why the United States was like, oh shit, we got caught slipping. We are going to start dumping a lot more money into controlling the narrative in Ukraine and making everybody there hate Russia. So people who are maybe under the age of 35 might think that everyone in Ukraine, if they're born in Ukraine, they might think everyone there has always hated Russia. That's not true. People old enough will tell you this was not the case until the USA started buying that opinion, basically, through media manipulation and propaganda. And we started a number of media campaigns there designed specifically to change this opinion so that people did not think that Russia was good for their country. All right, so this is what is being talked about here. So the United States was very aggressive in trying to keep the nationalists in power after they lost in the 2010 election. But the United States then started spending money through the National Endowment for Democracy, which was pumping money into various Ukrainian organizations, and they were doing the same thing in Russia and many other countries around the world. We're talking about many millions of dollars a year to affect the politics of these countries. When the occupations came in Independence Square in Kiev last year, this is what would start the 2014 coup, the Maidan Revolution, they called it. It's a coup, Euromaidan. You could see Svoboda's supporters, again, descendants of the OUMB and Bandera, and you can hear their leaders in the parliament making blatant anti-Semitic remarks. The leader of the Svoboda party went to Germany to protest the prosecution of John Demjanjuk, who was the Ukrainian who was settled in the United States and was implicated as a concentration camp guard in the killing of innocent people. The German courts found him guilty, and Svoboda leadership from Ukraine went to Germany to complain about them convicting this guy. The reason they said they didn't want any Ukrainian tainted with it is because they live a lie that no Ukrainian ever had anything to do with the Nazi Germany regime. When history betrays them and their own affiliations betray them, they get mad. They don't like that being out there publicly, so they always protest their innocence of any Ukrainian being charged with anything, regardless of what the evidence is. So this is why when you're talking to somebody who's weird, you go, was Stepan Bandera a Nazi? Because anybody with half a brain cell will be like, that was a Nazi. But these people who have bad intentions and they want to misrepresent history, they'll be like, no. He was a Ukrainian nationalist hero, and that is how you know you were talking to a Nazi. It's a form of Holocaust denial. It's crazy. Just like double genocide theory is a form of Holocaust denial. I don't know if you guys know this. Sometimes people will do this thing where they're like, well, the USSR was just as bad as the Nazis. They killed just as many people. That's called double genocide theory. That is a form of Holocaust denial. I think technically they call it Holocaust trivialization. It's a form of Holocaust denial, right? They want to pretend like Nazi Germany was also doing a Holocaust or something. They were not. That is not true. That is Holocaust denial. So this is similarly a form of Holocaust denial. This is kind of the rest of this article. I think that's good for us. You know, check it out though. It is the second document on here, and if you want to read the book that man is the author of, that's the first link. You can read it for free on archive.org. It is a very good book. How do they justify giving him a title of hero? They're right-wing freaks. They're neo-Nazis. They literally don't care. You saw the video. If you were here at the beginning of the stream, we watched a video for a guy who was just like, well, yeah, I'm not changing my ideas to these people. I support them. So, and he was very unapologetic about it, right? Okay. I have food in my teeth. I was back there. I felt it. So let's talk about the 2004 Orange Revolution and the aftermath. Now, I used for this a lot of mainstream European and American sources. There are some socialist sources in here, so I will point them out. But the reason I did this is because the main claim that Ukrainian nationalists have is that anything bad you've heard about Ukraine, anything you've heard about Nazis, that's all Russia. That's Russian propaganda. So when you talk about this, you're going to be like, Russian propaganda, Russian propaganda. It's not Russian propaganda, right? The first guy we just read, he's not Russian, he's American. We don't use Russian sources in this, not because we don't think that Russians should get to talk about this, but specifically because people will shut it down. They don't want to hear anything from Russia. Okay, that's fine. You only want to hear this from Americans and Europeans? We can do that. So this is a lot of mainstream news sources. There's a few socialist sources thrown in there, so you can tell people, if you don't like that, just ignore that one, whatever. But, you know, I'm a socialist, so I want to hear what socialists have to say. But for the most part, this is a lot of mainstream sources talking about these things. So you are going to get the mainstream bias, but I think it's really important to do it that way. Yeah, propaganda's always worked this way. As Malrich says, we've got statues of Robert E. Lee and shit, yeah. Now, this Ye Old Guardian, you guys know, the Spain of newspapers, if you will. The U.S. is behind the campaign of the turmoil in Kiev, they say. And this is in 2004, in the situation that would be known as the Orange Revolution. With their websites and stickers, their pranks and slogans aimed at banishing widespread fear of a corrupt regime, the democracy guerrillas of the Ukrainian Pora youth movement have already notched up a famous victory, whatever the outcome of the dangerous standoff in Kiev. Again, this is 2004. Ukraine, traditionally passive in its politics, has been mobilized by the young democracy activists and will never be the same again. Now remember, what did Russ Balance say? Well, the United States government was dumping a ton of money into Ukraine to try to do shit like this via the National Endowment for Democracy. This is what the U.S. government, the National Endowment for Democracy, was paying for young democracy activists to be taking the streets. But while the gains of the orange-bedecked chestnut revolution are Ukraine's, the campaign is an American creation, a sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing that in 4 countries in 4 years has been used to try to salvage rigged elections and topple unsavory regimes. Funded and organized by the U.S. government, deploying U.S. consultancies, pollsters, diplomats, and 2 big American parties and U.S. non-government organizations, the campaign was first used in Europe in Belgrade in 2000 to beat Slobodan Milosevic at the ballot box. Richard Miles, the U.S. ambassador to Belgrade, played a key role. And by last year, a U.S. ambassador in Tbilisi, he repeated the trick in Georgia, coaching Mikhail Saakashvili in how to bring down Edward Shevardnadze. This is a hard one for me because you guys know I can't pronounce anything, so I'm really sorry. This is a real difficult article for me. I do not know how to pronounce anything. As Mallory says, they always call these young for legitimacy. Yeah, like Mexico's Gen Z revolution, because they want you to think like the kids are progressive. So this is a progressive revolution against a conservative right-wing government. But because that might be true here in the United States, because our government is so conservative and young people tend to be more progressive, that's not necessarily true in other countries. Some countries have very progressive governments, and that means the people rising up against them with different beliefs tend to be actually conservative, and that's why they're upset about the progressive government. So that is important context. I'm glad Mallory shared that. So Richard Miles, the U.S. ambassador to Belgrade, is who we're talking about here. 10 months after the success in Belgrade, the U.S. ambassador in Minsk, Michael Kozak, a veteran of similar operations in Central America, notably in Nicaragua, organized a near-identical campaign to try to defeat the Belarus hard man, Lukashenko. That one failed. There will be no Kostunica in Belarus, the Belarus president declared, referring to the victory in Belgrade. Oh, see, they know. They're like, this is the CIA showing up on my front door trying to steal our election. And remember, when I say the USA only has one playbook and there's just a couple of plays in it, this is one of them. Stealing the elections is one of them. It looks exactly the same everywhere. These countries know when it's happening. But experience gained in Serbia, Georgia, and Belarus has been invaluable in plotting to beat the regime of Leonid Kuchma in Kiev. The operation, engineering democracy through the ballot box and civil disobedience, is now so slick that the methods have matured into a template for winning other people's elections. In the center of Belgrade, there is a dingy office staffed by computer-literate youngsters who call themselves the Center for Nonviolent Resistance. If you want to know how to beat a regime that controls the mass media, the judges, the courts, the security apparatus, and the voting stations, the young Belgrade activists are for hire. And again, this is, very, very Western lib perspective, so take it for what it is. But I think the info in the article is good, and the fact that it's coming from a mainstream European source, I think, is valuable in talking to the people who want to claim this is all Russian propaganda. Yes, as Shaz says, I don't know if you guys can see Shaz because it says suspicious user monitoring, but the CIA is responsible for so many things that should not have happened. They emerged from the anti-Milosevic student movement, Otpor, meaning resistance. The catchy single-word branding is important. In Georgia last year, the parallel student movement was Khmara. In Belarus, it was Zubir. In Ukraine, it's Pora, meaning high time. Otpor also had a potent, simple slogan that appeared everywhere in Serbia in 2000. The two words, Gotovje, meaning he's finished, a reference to Milosevic. A logo of a black and white clenched fist completed the masterful marketing. We're branding. We're doing what American capitalism does best. We're selling you on the idea of conservatism. We're making it young and hip, just like Pepsi. In Ukraine, the equivalent is a ticking clock, also signaling that the Kuchma regime's days are numbered. And because, Western libs, they're calling it a regime, whatever. Stickers spray painted on websites are the young activist weapon. Irony and street comedy mocking the regime have been hugely successful in puncturing public fear and enraging the powerful. Last year, before becoming president in Georgia, the U.S.-educated Mr. Saakashvili traveled from Tbilisi to Belgrade to be coached in the techniques of mass defiance. In Belarus, the U.S. Embassy organized the dispatch of young opposition leaders to the Baltics, where they met up with Serbs traveling from Belgrade. In Serbia's case, given the hostile environment in Belgrade, the Americans organized the overthrow from neighboring Hungary, Budapest, and Szeged. So, this, all is about Yugoslavia, so the Yugoslavia podcast might be a helpful backstory. In recent weeks, several Serbs traveled to the Ukraine. See how even in 2004, The Guardian is saying this. Well, this implied a region of Russia. So the territory in dispute over territory with Ukraine and Russia is nothing new. All right. In 2004, they were calling it the Ukraine as though it was a region of Russia still. Indeed, one of the leaders from Belgrade, Aleksandar Marek, was turned away at the border. The Democratic Party's National Democratic Institute, the Republican Party's International Republican Institute, the U.S. State Department, and USAID. Look, see, this is why I call it USAID. Oh my God, I'm going to yell at David so hard. David was like, why do you call it USAID? It's USAID. And I'm like, no, it's USAID. Because I swear to God, this is how people used to write it. I'm not crazy. It is USAID. It is USAID. I'm calling it USAID again. I will not be silenced by my podcast co-host, David Roberts. All right. these are the main agencies involved in the grassroots campaigns, as well as the Freedom House NGO and billionaire George Soros' Open Society Institute. So the Republicans were right about that one. So we got the Democratic Party, their NDI, the National Democratic Institute. We've got the Republican Party's International Republican Institute. We've got the State Department. We've got USAID. We got Freedom House, and we got George Soros. They're all working together. There's one big party. We're not invited, right? And what are they working together to do? Steal an election in Ukraine. U.S. pollsters and professional consultants are hired to organize focus groups and use psephological data to plot strategy. USAID because of David. We are revolting. Thank you. Thank you. It's USAID. He did this to us. I can't wait to rub this in his face. I'm going to take a screenshot of it and just text it to David. Very passive aggressive. The usually facetious opponents have to be united behind a single candidate if there's to be any chance of unseating the regime, the wording. That leader is selected on pragmatic and objective grounds, even if he or she is anti-American. In Serbia, U.S. pollsters Pan, Schoen, and Berland Associates discovered that the assassinated pro-Western opposition leader Zoran Djindjic was reviled at home and had no chance of beating Milosevic fairly in an election. He was persuaded to take a backseat to the anti-Western Vojislav Kostunica, who is now Serbian prime minister. In Belarus, U.S. officials ordered opposition parties to unite behind the dour, elderly trade unionist Vladimir Goncharik because he appealed to much of the Lukashenko constituency. Officially, and this is another thing too, the U.S. government will often back people who are not super far right, who are not super pro-American, just because they think it's an incremental better option than whoever is there. So sometimes people will be like, how can this be a Western stooge? They say bad things about the United States and they want to do this much socialism. Well, because the United States thought that was still better than the other guy. It doesn't matter. None of the United States is not ideological about this. They're practical. If it's slightly better, it's slightly better and they'll take it. Right? So a lot of people get confused by this. This isn't an ideology game. This is a numbers game. This is a money game. And if that guy's going to be slightly more favorable to Western business, fuck it. Who cares what he says? We'll take him. Right? So officially, the U.S. government spent $41 million organizing and funding a year-long operation to get rid of Milosevic in October of 1999. And Ukraine, they spent $14 million, and this was for the 2004 Orange Revolution, as it came to be told. Apart from the student movement and the united opposition, the other key element, and I just want to also point out, 2004 Orange Revolution, this was 3 years after 9/11, 4 years before the Great Recession, and this is where we're spending our money. Apart from the student movement and the united opposition, the other key element in the democracy template is what is known as the parallel vote tabulation, a counter to the election rigging tricks beloved of disreputable regimes. This is all just propaganda, but, whatever. Basically, we do our own vote count in a special American way. And this is how you end up with people claiming elections were stolen, when literally election monitors are there like, this was not stolen. But these are American election monitors that go in and do this. There are professional outside election monitors from bodies such as the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, but the Ukrainian poll, like its predecessors, also featured thousands of local election monitors trained and paid by Western groups. So these are our election monitors. Freedom House and the Democratic Party's NDI helped fund and organize, quote, the largest civil regional election monitoring effort in Ukraine. So, again, when you see the election was stolen, that's just the United States deciding that and saying that if something wasn't in our favor. So this involved more than 1,000 trained observers from the United States government's payroll. They also organized exit polls. On Sunday night, those polls gave Yushchenko an 11-point lead and set the agenda for much of what has followed. The exit polls are seen as critical because they seized the initiative in the propaganda battle with the regime, invariably appearing first, receiving wide media coverage, and putting the onus on the authorities to respond. Again, this is just the United States, though, so they could just be making up whatever they want. The final stage in the U.S. template, and it is a template, this is what we do in like every country, as they said at the beginning of the article, concerns how to react when an incumbent tries to steal a lost election. Again, we're just deciding if they win that it is stolen. We just decide that, but that's not said here. Okay. In Belarus, President Lukashenko won, so the response was minimal. In Belgrade, Tbilisi, and now Kiev, where the authorities initially tried to cling to power, the advice was to stay cool but determined and organize mass displays of civil disobedience, which must remain peaceful but risk provoking the regime into violent suppression. Now, this sentence, what do? We throw protests in an effort to attempt to provoke the political power there into suppressing the protests. So it's a threat. They know the United States is there. They know the United States is trying to buy the election. They know the United States is sending our own election monitors to try to claim things are fraudulent whenever we can. They know the United States is running our own candidates. And when we get a result we don't like from the election, we send thousands of people out into the streets who are angry. It's a threat. We're like, we're going to take it. If you don't step down, we're taking it. And then when the people are like, this is a foreign power trying to overthrow our country, we're locking these people up, then the United States is like, how dare you suppress democracy? This is our playbook. But this is not a peaceful protest. This is a threat. This is an attempt to provoke the regime. The regime, right? And even The Guardian says this. That's what they're trying to do. If the events in Kiev vindicate the U.S. and its strategies for helping other people win elections and take power from anti-democratic regimes, it's certain to try to repeat the exercise elsewhere in the post-Soviet world. The places to watch are Moldova and the authoritarian countries of Central Asia. Okay. So, whatever. Still pretty lived-up source, but a lot we can learn here about the United States' involvement in trying to steal elections, and in Ukraine in particular. Now, we're still on the topic of the 2004 Orange Revolution. This is going to take us a while to get through this. This is not going to be a one-day thing. I'm so sorry. When Ukraine set course for Europe, the Revolution of Dignity a decade later. So this is another thing they tried to brand it as. Or is this 2014? Oh, this is in the wrong section. I'm so sorry. Let me see, though. Maybe I put this here for a reason. Or did I miscategorize it? Oh, it does talk about it a little bit. But I'm going to move this, actually. I think that there's a better place for this. A better home for this. In here. Okay, so we'll stick it here. This is good that we're doing this in this order. So instead, we will do this article. U.S. intervention in the Orange Revolution in Ukraine and how technology influences democracy. No page found. Archive.ph. I haven't looked at these sources in a while. I put this document together over a year ago. So this is good. Excellent meme. Okay, good. I'm excited. I need to draw pictures for you guys too. So we're going to pull this up. What are you guys thinking so far about this content? Is anything shocking, interesting? Any questions so far? We are just getting started. We're just up to 2004. Any thoughts? Yeah, you've been through it on your own? Yeah, okay. Good, you're learning a lot. Okay, good. It's not shocking. It is useful to revisit. That's how I feel too. I'm like, oh, and I tried to change the layout to go in a specific order kind of recently, a couple months ago. So this is my first time doing that. Oh my God, is this really taken down? I'm gonna look on Wayback Machine. Hold on, I'm searching. They literally took it down. It's nowhere to be found. Uh-oh. What's up with left comms, right? They like that they haven't done enough reading. They want to argue, but they haven't read enough. It's pretty crazy. I'm going to see if I can find this anywhere else. Leah Moraz. I used to use this source. There was a source in my podcast and it's no longer there. Oh, so sad. Oh, we don't have it anymore. She's gone. She's gone, Leah Morris. Okay. Well, that's a bummer. So we'll get rid of this. We're going to go to the next one. RIP. We lost a real source. A real one. Which is the link? I removed it. But it's Leah Morris's article. It's the Manchester Historian article. Oh my God. Oh, okay. Okay, here we go. Read online. All right, so we're going to skip ahead. The Orange Revolution isn't super important other than to know we were super involved, right? And we're now going to get into this document, which is U.S. democracy assistance programs in Ukraine after the Orange Revolution. So, the 2004 democratic breakthrough, also known as the Orange Revolution, was a dramatic moment in the evolution of Ukrainian post-communist political regimes. Mass rallies against election fraud helped Ukrainian citizens to regain basic political rights and civil liberties. However, the Orange Revolution fell short of skyrocketing the country into the ranks of consolidated democracies. Again, this is super lived-up perspective, so just look for the info. During his 5-year term, President Viktor Yushchenko and his team could not overcome 2 major obstacles. First, the Orange leadership failed to reform state institutions and go beyond a mere personnel change. This is the guy that basically we put in as our Western guy. In the wake of the Orange Revolution, Yushchenko and another Orange leader, Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko, replaced some 18,000 government officials on the ground of political loyalty. Now, Tymoshenko is the braid lady. For those of you who know, she's like the insane woman with the Heidi braid. She's the one who later proclaimed that the 2014 revolution was a coup. She was like, our country's been couped. She is cuckoo balls. She's a psycho, but I think she's interesting. She's an interesting psycho. The hair is amazing. Send the link. You'll try to find it. Hold on. I'll send the cursed link. Let me see. I'm going to make you a tiny URL for it. Because I can't type it all. I can't copy and paste into our chat. I don't know if you guys know that. Some of you don't know that. But yes, this is it. Autistic Baddie 3. Thank you. Oh yeah, Tymoshenko, doesn't she look crazy? I kind of love it. Like, she looks insane. Yeah, it's the one Autistic Baddie 3 said. Yeah, this is definitely not a day endeavor. So what they're talking about here is what happened, the aftermath of the Orange Revolution. So the Orange Revolution also devoted little effort to entrenching the rule of law. Yushchenko abused his authority, they say, over the judiciary, even going so far as to abolish the court, which ruled in favor of his political opponents. Right? So this is the pro-democracy regime we put in, democracy that we put in place instead of the regime. This is what they were up to. Both ruling and opposition politicians continued to bribe judges, arbitrarily sack them, and even storm the courthouses. And in sum, the overall failure to establish a clear division of power and effective systems of checks and balances has left Ukraine vulnerable to sliding back towards authoritarian rule. The academic community has widely discussed possible reasons that could account for the less than satisfactory outcome of the 2004 democratic breakthrough in Ukraine. So this article goes into it. I feel like this is not all super relevant to us, but the section we are going to look at is U.S. democracy assistance programs in Ukraine. You can read this whole article if you want. But what I think is really important to take away from this is that we basically did a coup in Ukraine. We stole an election, and you can think about it however you want. Whether the election results were valid or not doesn't even matter to me. What matters is we bought people's opinions through mass propaganda campaigns and disinformation campaigns. So what's interesting is that we failed and we lost control of Ukraine for a while. And that, I think, is what's really important. In 2010, we lost control of Ukraine, and that is why the second coup attempt had to happen in 2013, 2014. So that's the context that's really important to understand here. Now, the section of this that's just interesting, U.S. democracy assistance programs in Ukraine. The 2004 presidential elections that triggered the Orange Revolution drew special attention on the U.S. government. In 2004, several famous U.S. political leaders, Madeleine Albright, Zbigniew Brzezinski, George Older Bush, H.W. Bush, and others. No, younger. That's the younger Bush. God, the Russ Bellin in my head. I can't keep the Bushes straight. It's because we have the monarchistic dynasty here. It's because we have the monarchy here where the country is just begetted to the next Bush or Kennedy or Clinton forever. That's how it goes. So whatever the HW one was. HW was the older Bush. I can't keep these guys straight. All right. Older but Daddy Bush. I was right the first time. They visited Ukraine with a mission to persuade President Kuchma not to rig the forthcoming elections. There's no evidence he was rigging it. At the pragmatic level, USAID allocated almost $1.5 million for election-related activities. Ukrainian NGOs received enough money to carry out independent exit polls, produce television spots encouraging people to vote, publish and distribute literature explaining to people their rights, and monitor violations of those rights. The special attention paid by the Bush administration can be explained by its discontent with Kuchma's policies and non-democratic rule. However, with the pro-Western president, Yushchenko, being in charge of Ukrainian foreign policy, the situation seemed to have radically changed. So we're just openly admitting that we meddle in these elections. So we don't respect the democracy of other countries, the sovereignty of other countries, and we're just going to meddle, and we're going to make sure that you get a guy in there that we like. Is it dyslexia? No, I don't have dyslexia. The presence of the W throws me off because we were known to refer to George W. Bush as W. So whenever I see a W, I'm like, it's the young one. But no, they're just named like that. American culture is beautiful. It's burger right culture to name your son the same thing as you, apparently. Yeah. W. The W throws me off. It's propaganda. It's branding. I don't know. So, we're openly admitting that we just want to meddle in everybody's elections to make sure the outcome is favorable to us. Following the general hypothesis of this article, one could expect the U.S. to significantly reduce or even terminate funding for electoral aid programs in Ukraine after the Orange Revolution. At least this hypothesis should be valid with regard to the 2006 parliamentary elections because Yanukovych and his party of regions had not returned to power by that time. In addition, one should look for any bias of U.S. programs in favor of the Orange political forces. All interviewed U.S. assistance providers claim that the electoral aid continued to be provided on demand. An interviewed representative of a U.S. aid mission in Ukraine, who spoke on the condition of anonymity, argued that the U.S. government often made additional resources available to support election activities, especially when election-related needs could not be foreseen. Sergei Rishsov, an expert for democracy small grant programs at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, echoed this argument by saying the U.S. Embassy had announced additional compensation for funding before every parliamentary and presidential election. The quote is, "I don't remember a single year when we have not supported the national elections in Ukraine." He also admitted that local elections usually receive less attention. Election monitoring and exit polls can be regarded as two of the most important programs of the electoral aid sector. So think about this with American democracy as well, or maybe where you live in your country, it's the same way. Polling is often used to determine who the candidate should be. So who's polling well here in the United States determines who people vote for, right? Because of how our political electoral system works. So what they're talking about is they use polling in a different way in other countries, and that's to pressure the existing sitting power that they don't like. So if they're like, oh, looks like our polls showed that like 70% of people liked our guy, it doesn't matter if that's true or not. But saying that does a couple things to the sitting power structure that we don't like. One, it tells them, we're prepared to fake this election and we are prepared to steal it from you. What are you going to do? Whether it's true or not, right? And the second thing it does is it basically says you're going to see a lot of people in the streets if this goes in a way we don't like. Whether those people are real or not, doesn't matter. Whether they're Western backed or not, doesn't matter. But it's a threat. It's a threat in many ways, right? And we admitted that. In the Guardian article, they admitted that. So therefore, it is important to check if the U.S. government donors funded election monitoring and exit polls not only during the 2004 presidential elections, but also during the 2006 and 2007 parliamentary ones. In the field of election monitoring, the most active U.S. donor was the National Democratic Institute, NDI. It both deployed its own observers to Ukraine and funded election observation missions organized by other local and foreign organizations. During the 2004 presidential elections, the Central Election Commission of Ukraine officially registered 1,274 NDI observers. During the 2006 parliamentary elections, the number plummeted to a mere 15 observers, and then it rose again to 41 during the 2007 early parliamentary elections. So you can see, we're really trying to control that election, right? So when you hear election observers say the election was stolen, remember, those are Americans. That's an American government source saying that to you. But they don't present it that way. They present it like it's very fair and impartial, maybe even people from the country doing it. Well, it's the National Democratic Institute, the NDI, the U.S. government. At first sight, it seems the NDI has completely lost interest in the electoral process in Ukraine since 2004. In fact, NDI did fund numerous missions of other organizations during 2006 and 2007 instead of sending its own observers. They supported the Committee of Voters in Ukraine, which had the largest local mission of 3,166 officially registered observers, the European Network of Election Monitoring Organizations, which sent the second largest foreign mission of 440 observers. In 2007, NDI again provided support to that same group, etc., etc. Apart from election monitoring, the other important safeguard of transparent electoral process is an independent exit poll conducted on the day of voting. Indeed, the results of such poll are highly publicized during the 2004 presidential elections and help to expose the election fraud. So, so you can choose to believe that it actually is election fraud happening here in these places if you want. You can choose to believe that the United States government wants to control the election monitoring out of the kindness of its heart and just to make a good business. You can choose to believe that people who don't agree with the United States government's results on their election in their country are committing election fraud. I don't believe that. I believe that there's a reason why we are sending all of these people here to tell you the outcome of that election, and that it doesn't matter what the actual outcome is what they are actually saying. I also believe that it does not matter if people actually vote in favor of the U.S. Candidate or not, if they vote in favor of the U.S. candidate because they are receiving propaganda and disinformation from the U.S. government about their country's politics. So I think that the second the United States shows up and starts pumping propaganda into your country about your politics, they've already stolen the election. The election's already stolen. It doesn't matter if you actually vote for them or not, whatever, it doesn't matter. They've stolen the election because they've taken control of the narrative, they've influenced it, they've removed your democratic right and your right to sovereignty, right? They have removed your right to sovereignty. During the 2004 presidential elections, the national exit poll was funded by a group of foreign donors, including 3 U.S. government donors: USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, and the U.S. Embassy. The poll was also supported by the Eurasia Foundation, which was funded mostly by USAID, and therefore can qualify as a U.S. government donor as well. After 2004, USAID and Eurasia Foundation did not support the national exit poll anymore. However, the rest, 2 U.S. governmental donors, NED and the U.S. Embassy, funded the poll during both 2006 and 2007's parliamentary elections. The collected evidence does not support the hypothesis that the U.S. government, being satisfied with Yushchenko's foreign policy, may have abandoned its electoral aid programs in Ukraine. U.S. governmental donors continued to fund both election monitoring and exit polls after the Orange Revolution. Naturally, the 2006 and 2007 parliamentary elections received less attention than the presidential ones, but they were not neglected. There's only one caveat to mention. Some periods between election campaigns, various laws on elections can be mentioned as an example. Ukrainian NGOs dealt with the election monitoring, and they reported that foreign donors didn't work on super important issues. So what they're saying here is that basically the United States government did not leave after the Orange Revolution, but they were spending less money because they were parliamentary elections and the U.S. government didn't think they were as important. So that's kind of what's going on here. So we don't have to read the entire thing. But, there's some interesting thing. The collected evidence, they say, does not support the hypothesis that U.S. governmental donors could have discriminated certain Ukrainian parties that opposed Yushchenko's foreign policy and were regarded as hostile to U.S. interests. On the contrary, Party of Regions, as the best organized political party in Ukraine, was able to take more U.S. assistance with each year. So they actually started paying Yushchenko's party as well, which I think is really interesting. They're just paying everybody. They're just like, whatever we can do to be in charge of Ukraine now, we want to do. And that's really what happened here. So this is 11 pages. It's a paper, and it's very, very interesting. Now, I'm so sad we lost our good link to it. But we then also have something here from the U.S. State Department from 2004. And it's like, why does the United States want to be so involved in Ukraine? And that's really what we're trying to get into here. And this is a testimony before the House International Relations Committee, Subcommittee on Europe, from Stephen Pfeiffer, who is Deputy Assistant Secretary for European and Eurasian Affairs. And he's talking to the committee, and he says, the U.S. vision for Ukraine has remained constant for more than 10 years. The U.S. government wants to see Ukraine develop as a stable, independent, democratic, economically prosperous country. And of course, democratic just means capitalist. A country that increasingly draws closer to Europe and to European and Euro-Atlantic institutions, that promotes human rights and abides by the rule of law, that maintains positive, mutually beneficial relations with its neighbors, and that actively contributes to strengthening peace and security in the national community. So, what does this mean? Well, it means we know the United States got heavily involved in Ukraine's politics. We know we had a history of supporting and uplifting neo-Nazis and the far right in Ukraine, going back to World War II and throughout the 80s. We know the United States is invested in Ukraine becoming more right-wing, more capitalist, turning to Europe and the United States to do business. And we know the United States is willing to spend money and tamper with elections and create a lot of propaganda in order to take control of Ukraine in that way. Right? We're engineering democracy, exactly as Weebcore says. So, this guy goes on and says, we believe the majority of Ukrainian people share this vision. We support this vision because we believe such a Ukraine will be good for its people, will contribute to a more stable and secure Europe, will be a partner with the United States in today's new challenges, such as countering proliferation and defeating terrorism. Remember, this is 2004, so we were all in the war on terror. So this basically means they'll let us use their country as a military base like we do with Israel. And will continue to be a country, or rather, and will be a country with which we can have robust and mutually beneficial economic and trade relations. We want to make money. We want to use them as a military base and make money off them. Many Americans understand that helping Ukraine to realize this vision is in our own national interest. This is why we're pumping millions of dollars into controlling the outcome of elections in Ukraine, into engineering our version of democracy in Ukraine. This is why we spent so much money fostering and developing right-wing Ukrainian nationalists in the United States. It is important to recall that the road to Ukrainian independence during the past century has not been an easy one. In 1917, the Central Rada proclaimed Ukrainian autonomy, and in 1918, following the Bolshevik seizure of power in St. Petersburg, the Ukrainian National Republic declared independence. After 3 years of conflict and civil war, the western part of Ukraine was incorporated into Poland, and the central and eastern regions were incorporated into the Soviet Union in 1922. The Ukrainian national idea preserved throughout the Soviet period, but Ukraine suffered immeasurably. In 1932 to 1933, the Soviet authorities waged a campaign of terror that ravaged the Ukrainian elites and created an artificial famine called the Holodomor in Ukraine. Ravaged the Ukrainian elites basically told the kulaks that they had to collectivize and share their food. Created an artificial famine, this was a cyclical famine that had occurred in the region over and over again. This is not an artificial famine. It was a real famine, though many people died. It also affected Kazakhstan. So if it was an artificial famine, why did it affect Kazakhstan as well? This doesn't make sense. They also don't know that there was also a famine in Ukraine in the 1920s because it was a region prone to famine. And that there is documented evidence of famines there going back to 1090, I think, is the first time a famine was documented in this area. So that's, again, though, this is why the story of the Holodomor is so important. It's propaganda designed to make us think that Russia hated Ukraine, that the USSR hated Ukraine, and that Ukrainians hate the USSR and Russia. We saw earlier from the 2009 polling, Ukrainians did not hate Russia. And this was actually the biggest problem for the United States. We had to engineer a situation wherein Ukrainians would hate Russia. So they would have no choice but to turn to us and allow us to use them as a military base and make money off of them. So the Second World War was another heavy blow. Estimates are that some 10 million Ukrainians lost their lives. In the Holocaust, that the United States backed the perpetrators of and invited to come live in the United States and get incorporated into the Republican Party. In 1986, Ukrainians again suffered a tragedy of historic proportions with the explosion of reactor number 4 at Chernobyl. Ukraine and its neighbors recently marked the 18th anniversary of the Chernobyl explosion, and the country continues to feel the effects of that disaster. So they go on to talk about this new era in post-communist Ukraine. So they want to say Ukraine has not made as much progress as we hoped it would. They had choices the Ukrainian leadership made or did not make. They weren't as capitalist, basically. They didn't let us really open up the doors, let us in and come to American-style capitalism to the extent that we wanted, right? And that's really what's going on here. They're talking about Ukraine managing to repair its relations with the IMF and World Bank. We want to exploit Ukraine for economic gains. While Ukraine has made progress on the economic reform, much remains to be done. Tax reform is incomplete. The problem of arrears and refunds and the value-added tax persists. Energy sector reform stalled. Many in the government appear not to trust market mechanisms, capitalism, as was evident during last year's grain shortages when the government implemented informal price controls. Right? There's grain shortages, and they're mad that the government created price controls so people could afford to eat. The investment climate remains hampered by cumbersome and opaque regulatory framework. It's not deregulated. Their investment market's not deregulated enough for the United States. That's why we got to get in there and buy elections. Corrupt and illicit business practices. Okay. Arbitrary judicial system. Intellectual property protection is weak, with piracy and counterfeiting of U.S. products at unacceptable high levels. Protection of private property is still inadequate. Privatizations are executed with little transparency for investors. As a result, foreign investment remains low compared with other countries in the region, a cumulative $6.7 billion at the end of 2003, compared to about $70 billion in neighboring Poland. Ukraine needs to correct fundamental legal and business infrastructure problems in order to stimulate the investment needed to sustain economic growth over a long time. So we want to get in there, and we want to get you cooking. We want to turn you into a money-making machine, right? We want to make money off you, Ukraine. And this is what they're like, there's too many regulations, there's too many laws, there's some corruption, and I'm not going to pretend like there wasn't corruption. The guy that they were trying to oust in the 2004 color revolution, he was literally implicated in the murder of a journalist, and everybody kind of thinks he did it, you know? So they did deal with corruption for sure, but the corruption the United States can deal with. Look at the people we're friends with. We're buddies with all sorts of corrupt fucking psychopaths all over the world. Doesn't even matter. What we're really mad about is that we can't make money there. And we think we should be able to. And this is what's going on. All right. So they're talking about the 2004 presidential election, the Orange Revolution, as it's called. And they're saying, well, the U.S. government doesn't back any particular candidate. Our interest is free and fair electoral process. But they're like, we worked with whoever wanted to. And who wanted to conveniently was a U.S.-backed guy, right? So Ukrainian authorities continue to harass opposition politicians and those that support them, they say. They talk about Donetsk. That's going to become major when we talk about what's going on in current days. There's conflict. What we're seeing is that Ukraine is getting really divided by U.S. influence in the region. And we will see that start to cement by 2013. The East is more aligned with Russia and the old way of doing things. The West is more susceptible to the pro-Western, pro-EU propaganda and money and influence that the United States is pumping into that country all throughout this time. Harassment of the press has included closures of critical media outlets for alleged tax violations or licensing problems. Most recently, the authorities took steps to end Radio Liberty broadcasting in Ukraine. Now, if you didn't know any better, you would think Radio Liberty was a free and fair news organization. Oh my God, they're limiting the press in Ukraine. What is Radio Liberty, though, right? We know what Radio Liberty is. Radio Liberty and Radio Free Europe is a part of the USAGM. What is the USAGM? Well, it's an official website that we're on of the US government, .gov. It's our propaganda network. So Ukraine kicked out the American government from disseminating propaganda within their borders. Just one thing. And we're now claiming, right, that is an example of them cracking down on the free press. So that's also just interesting to add in there. So they're talking about this. They're talking about NATO and Ukraine. Our message to Ukraine on democracy in the election stresses the importance of a free and fair process for Ukraine's integration into Euro-Atlantic structures, including NATO. President Kuchma and other members of Ukrainian leadership have set NATO membership as a goal for Ukraine. The United States is prepared to support Ukraine drawing closer to and ultimately entering the alliance, provided that Ukraine takes and implements the decisions needed for defense, economic, and political reform to meet the standards of NATO. By virtue of its deployment to Iraq, Ukraine has already demonstrated that it has the political will and capability to make serious contributions to meeting global security needs. We're using their military in the war on terror at this time, right? NATO has conducted dialogue with Ukraine about the requirements for membership within the framework of the Charter. So we are already courting NATO-Ukraine membership at this point. Ukraine-EU relations. Ukraine has expressed ambition to join the European Union with this new guy in charge that we put in place. And they're talking about Russia. So they say the two countries are drawn together by overlapping histories and cultural identities. A significant portion of Ukraine's citizens, particularly in the east and in Crimea, put a pin in that, it's going to be important later, are ethnic Russians. Most Ukrainians realistically understand the importance of maintaining good relations with Russia. On the other hand, many are wary of domination by Moscow and increasingly look westward. I mean, you saw in 2009, 46% of Ukrainians, I believe was the number, said the influence of Russia on their country was actually good. So this is something the United States is paying to try to change actively at this time, but if it has been changed yet, probably not. So that was in 2009, and this is from 2001 to 2009, so this is them just bullshitting. We actually know that the United States was trying to cultivate that attitude at the time, but we hadn't quite got there. So what we're talking about here, too, in this is Ukraine's balancing act between the West and Russia, and that's ultimately going to be what leads to the next coup in 2013-24. So going on to economic issues, U.S. assistance. So this is all the money that the U.S. wants to give into transforming Ukraine, building a modern market economy so that they can make money. So Ukraine had already received $3.328 billion in money from the United States government at this time since 1991. And here's all the ways it had been spent. Law enforcement, elections, democracy, achievements, it says, all the stuff we already heard about. And this is what the U.S. is telling us is our goals in doing this and what we want to get into, right? So, at this point, we are going to have a series of articles that are a lot shorter, which will be easier for us to get through. So the question is, for the special feature, would you guys like for us to continue going for the next 30 minutes and get into the issue of NATO, or would you like to switch to map and we will pick this up maybe next Tuesday? We'll continue along with it. What do you guys think? So every Tuesday we'll go through the document. Yes to map or yes to keep going? Should I do a poll? I'll do a poll. Okay, 3-minute poll at the top. So do your poll. Take your poll. Let me know what you think. Are you guys enjoying this still? Is it boring? Is it dry? I never know if this stuff's fun. Do your vote. Do your vote. Do your vote. We did just finish this section. So we are at a good stopping point. But then the question is, well, I guess we just do this every Tuesday until it's done. Two Crane Tuesdays. Choose Crane. No, it's okay. Don't worry, Virgo. Not so fast. Choose Crane. Tuesday topics. What about that? Topic Tuesday. We do a deep dive into a topic. Is that? I think topic Tuesday. We got Monday, Wednesday, Friday for news. We got topic Tuesday. We got theory Thursday. Ukraine. Resource document Tuesday. Enjoy stable changes. Yeah. Must alliterate. Topic Tuesday. That's the alarm. That's the alarm. I'm going to go get a little bit more coffee while the poll finishes, okay? Hold on. I'm back. Hi, sorry. Okay, more. We're going to do more. We're going to do more. All right. Let's get into it. Okay. 2 cups of coffee. I need to deal with my shit. So let's get into NATO. So we're mentioning NATO. The U.S. government is like, we got to get them in NATO. We got to get them in the EU. We got to do all of this. So, all right. What is NATO? BBC. What is NATO and which countries are in it? All right. Oh, fuck you, BBC. Fucking BBC. Fucking British people. Okay. So, Poland's Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, has said Polish and other NATO aircraft shot down a number of Russian drones. This is from 4 years ago. No, 2 days ago. No, who is in NATO and what are Article 4 and Article 5? No, this is new. Okay, they updated this link apparently with some new shit about NATO. I don't know why they did that, but whatever. What is NATO? NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was formed in Washington, D.C. in 1949 by 12 countries. The founding members were Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, the UK, and the U.S. NATO's primary purpose was to block expansion in Europe by the Soviet Union, a group of communist republics dominated by Russia, which was dissolved in 1991. The alliance does not have its own army, but member states can take collective military action in response to international crises. Right? So, NATO, they say, supported the UN intervening in the war in the former Yugoslavia between 1992 and 2004. NATO bombed civilians in Yugoslavia and destroyed the country. It was horrible. It was horrible. NATO destroyed Yugoslavia and slaughtered a bunch of civilians. So Article 5 is one of NATO's core principles. It says an armed attack against one or more members will be considered an attack against all. In response, each member should be, able to take action it deems necessary, including the use of armed force, to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. Now, today, NATO has 32 members across Europe and North America, the original 12 founders, plus 20 countries, which have joined since 1949. Now, remember, this was originally created to fight communists, right? This is the most powerful countries in the world coming together to fight communists, in the USSR, specifically. The USSR does not exist anymore. So why does NATO still exist? And what is the role of NATO? Well, we saw in Yugoslavia, it was to kill communists in Yugoslavia, I guess. But now it's just like a general anti-Russia group or something. Nobody's really sure. So this is the current status of NATO. All right, that's what's going on. So Russia's getting encircled. Now, I just want to look at these colors. So, the founder members, 1949, are the dark red. All right, look how far they are from Russia. The burgundy colors. Yeah. And NATO's anti-communist is still here. Bye, Kobashi. Okay. So then, from 1950 to 1996, big gap of time, but whatever, all of the darker red join. Okay, they're still pretty far, right? Imagine... none of this is filled in. It's only these two dark red colors. Okay. Well, then, the USSR stops existing in 1991. Russia's like, cool, we're being capitalist now. Awesome, yay, we're doing capitalism just like you wanted, United States. Cool, let us into your capitalism club. And not only is the United States like, haha, actually no. From 1997 to 2022, look at all these countries here, this color, that joined NATO. All of these countries, which is now just basically an anti-Russia group. Nobody really knows why NATO still exists, but they're not being very welcoming to Russia. They're not treating Russia like it's one of them, and they're growing. Now, since 2022, look at all of these light pinks that have started joining here. And remember, the Ukraine-Russia war officially launched in 2022. So, from 1997 on, we're plopping 1, 2, 3 countries on the border with Russia. We're bringing them into NATO, which is apparently just our anti-Russia pact now, right? Yeah, Malrush, you were 11 when Yugoslavia was bombed. I recall thinking nobody can be able to tell me why they're bombing Yugoslavia. This seems weird. Yeah, I had a hard time processing it too at the time. Hi, chat. Hi, Rosio. Welcome. Fresno is not part of NATO. You take that back. We have our own alliance. It's called FRATO. The Fresno Atlantic Treaty Organization. FRATO. Oh, yeah, they're just anti-Russia. So this anti-Russia alliance is now bringing in people right on Russia's fucking border. And now Ukraine's applying to join. You see why Russia might be a little like, hey guys, You're getting real close to me. I'm here. What's up with all this direction? Why are we moving towards me? That's a little concerning. You can see why this might be a fucking national security concern for Russia, okay? If this were any other country in the world, imagine this is a different country. Imagine China is doing this to Taiwan, if you're a liberal. You can see Taiwan being like, why is China making an anti-Taiwan alliance and it's creeping closer to me, Taiwan? Liberals would be flipping their shit, right? But because it's Russia, everybody's like, cope, right? So just kind of remember that. If you're trying not to be weird about Russia and you're neutral on Russia and it's just a country, any country would be threatened by this. Fucking any country on the planet would be threatened by this, right? So this is what's going on. This is what NATO is. Now, Ukraine's prospects for joining the alliance have been clouded by its ongoing war with Russia. Russia has consistently opposed the idea of NATO becoming a member, fearing it would bring NATO forces too close to its borders. That seems fair to me. In 2008, the alliance said that Ukraine could eventually join, and after Russia's 2022 invasion, Ukrainian President Zelensky asked for this process to be fast-tracked, but NATO's chief at the time, Jens Stoltenberg, said Ukraine could join in the long term, but not until after the war was ended. Basically, NATO was like, we're not going to help you win this war. Okay, so Hegseth said the U.S. does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. I remember the communists were saying this from the beginning. Oh, we're not letting Ukraine in NATO. Are you kidding? Ukraine's never going to be in NATO. And that's what we were saying from the beginning. So this is just my personal hypothesis. Why did we do all this? I think we wanted to provoke Ukraine into a war with Russia, so Ukraine would lose its pesky pro-Russian residents to Russia and be smaller, left behind, but 100% on board with the West. So I think everybody we couldn't convince with propaganda to be in favor of United States and European expansion, like psychologically and economically within Ukraine's borders, I think it was preferable for us if they just became Russian so we didn't have to deal with them. A cleanse, if you will. Yes, Chinese mustard. This is just my personal hypothesis, okay? So just want to put that out there. That's just my theory. That's my guess. Marxist Gamer Zero says, imagine Russia having a military base in Mexico. Exactly. I always say I live in LA. Imagine Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea have a military alliance, and they've all parked missiles in Tijuana pointed at LA. That's a little, I think we'd be right to be sketched out by that, right? We'd be like, that, is there a reason? Those are all there. That's what Russia is doing with all this. Russia's like, what? This feels weird. Right. It's functionally the same as a Cuban Missile Crisis, Mallory says. Yes. So that's what's going on. That's what's up with NATO. Now, at the end of the Cold War, Russia was promised that NATO would not expand towards Russia's borders. And this is true. This is from NATO Watch. And this is a document from 2018. So, on December 12th, 2017, the National Security Archive at George Washington University posted online 30 declassified US, Soviet, German, British, and French documents, revealing a torrent of assurances about Soviet security given by Western leaders to Gorbachev and other Soviet officials throughout the process of German unification in 1990 and on into 1991. Some of the documents have been publicly available for several years. Others have only been revealed as a result of a Freedom of Information request for the study. U.S. Secretary of State James Barker's famous not 1 inch eastward assurance about NATO expansion in his meeting with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev on February 9th, 1990 was only a part of a cascade of similar assurances. So the question is, why is Russia mad? Why does Russia get to decide who joins NATO? Well, because for years we were telling them we weren't going to do this to them, and then we did. As the authors Svetlana Savranskaya and Tom Blanton argue, the document showed that multiple national leaders were considering and rejecting Central and Eastern European membership in NATO as of early 1990 through 1991. That discussions of NATO in the context of German unification negotiations were not at all narrowly limited to the status of East Germany territory, and subsequent Soviet and Russia complaints about being misled about NATO expansion were founded in written contemporaneous memcons and telcons at highest levels. The document reinforces former CIA Director Robert Gates' criticism of pressing ahead with expansion of NATO eastward in the 1990s when Gorbachev and others were led to believe this would not happen. During the discussions to reunify East and West Germany, the Western parties sought to defuse Moscow's fears that a reunified state in the heart of Europe would present a threat to the Soviet Union. Gorbachev only accepted German reunification, over which the Soviet Union had a legal right to veto, because he received assurances that NATO would not expand after he withdrew his forces from Eastern Europe. From James Baker, President George H.W. Bush, West German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, and CIA Director Robert Gates, French President Francois Mitterrand, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, British Foreign Minister Douglas Hurd, British Prime Minister John Major, and NATO Secretary General Manfred Wörner. So, these are all the people that told Russia, don't worry, NATO's not going to get close to you. Now remember the map. Remember how much NATO has crept since then, since 1990. We talked about that, right? So the idea that Russia should not be upset about this or worried about this is frankly insane. We've known since 1990 that this would be upsetting to Russia if we did this. So when I say the United States is to blame for the Ukraine-Russia war, this is part of what I mean. We knew expanding NATO that far would provoke Russia. We knew Russia would know what it meant. And we knew that talking about letting Ukraine into Russia would be particularly fucking insane. Would basically be rubber stamping a you're going to war for Ukraine and Russia. We knew this. In February, George H.W. Bush, Secretary of State, James Baker assured his Soviet counterpart Edward Shevardnadze that in a post-Cold War Europe, NATO would no longer be belligerent. Less of a military organization, much more of a political one, would have no need for independent capability. Again, I just want to point this out. This is 2 years before NATO, I believe, started bombing Yugoslavia. When was the Yugoslavia bombing of NATO? What year? I can't remember the exact year. Yes, now. Okay, yeah, so this was 8 years before, I guess. Sorry, my bad. My timing was way off. But still, less than a decade later, NATO was actively bombing communists. Nonetheless, Baker promised, ironclad guarantees that NATO's jurisdiction of forces would not move eastward. On the same day in Moscow, he famously told the Soviet General Secretary that the alliance would not move 1 inch to the east. Also, I like that I told you guys earlier, I don't know if this was in the TikTok streamer here, that I mix dates up within a 10-year range sometimes when going off the top of my head, and it was like literally almost a 10-year range there. The following day, February 10th, 1990, Helmut Kohl, the future Chancellor of United Germany, repeated the same thought to Gorbachev, even as they disagreed on other issues. We believe that NATO should not expand the sphere of its activity. We have to find a reasonable solution. I correctly understand the security interests of the Soviet Union, and I realize that you, Mr. General Secretary, and the Soviet leadership will have to clearly explain what is happening to the Soviet people, Kohl said. The promises not to expand NATO only lasted until 1997, however, when Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary were invited into the alliance. In total, 13 Eastern European states have become NATO members since then. Gorbachev and subsequently Putin have frequently bemoaned the West's broken promise, with the latter insisting that it fundamentally undermined the fragile trust between an internationally retreating Russia and an ascendant United States. Nonetheless, NATO and senior Western officials have continued to claim that there was no official promise. None of the assurances of non-expansion were included in any treaty documents, as NATO makes clear in its official explanation on the website. NATO allies take decisions by consensus, and these are recorded. There is no record of any such decision having been taken by NATO. Personal assurances from NATO leaders cannot replace alliance consensus and do not constitute a formal NATO agreement. Former U.S. Ambassador to Moscow, Michael McFaul, labeled the idea of a reneged promise a myth in an interview in 2016. Other experts have labeled Russian grievances as a case of false memory syndrome. With the exception of RT in Russia and a handful of online opinion articles, no major media outlet has so far reported on the release of these newly declassified documents. RT is, I think, Russian Times. Libs hate that. They won't trust anything from RT, so never use RT as a source for talking to Libs. And ending the Cold War by breaking promises to Gorbachev, the attitude of the revised Russia of today should not come as a surprise. As the Russian journalist and columnist for Bloomberg, Leonid Bershidsky concludes, it is highly unlikely that any successor to Putin will simply cast aside the broken promise story, which is now embedded in the Russian government's post-Soviet DNA. For years, perhaps decades, maintaining a confrontation with Russia will be easier than rebuilding trust. So, we see that they did indeed a number of times and a number of people tell Russia this wasn't going to happen, and Russia's only mistake was trusting. Trusting. right? Trusting, choosing to trust, and in this new world they were coming forward to forge with the West. Now, once you understand Russia geopolitically as wanting very much to participate in the global capitalist arena, wanting a seat at the table after the dismantling of the USSR, and being rejected and denied by the West, you will have the correct political orientation to understand these issues. Russia wants to be welcomed in the Western world. They want to. They are capitalists now. They want to make money too. They want to be engaged in us. And being shut out repeatedly by the United States and Europe, they don't like that. They do not like that. They are not some belligerent psychopaths who want to take over the world. They want a seat at the table. And they are not going to do insane things just for the sake of doing them. They are only going to do things that upset the world order if they feel that their safety and security is being threatened. And that's exactly what we're going to understand going forward. Former CIA agent Left Libertarian, was a show on Russia Today, says the RT doesn't pressure their staff to push propaganda, at least not him. That's good. Now we got NATO broke that promise and has continued to expand eastward. We already kind of saw this, but a timeline of NATO expansion since 1949, 1952, Greece and Turkey, 1955, West Germany. This isn't as important as what happens after 1991. 1991, the Soviet Union is dismantled, it doesn't collapse. But 1994, Finland and Sweden enter, right? Then they become part of the EU. 1999, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland join NATO. 2001, they actually use the attack on one as the attack of all because of the 9/11 attacks. And then 2002, the NATO-Russia Council is formed to help NATO members and Russia work together on security issues. So already Russia is like, hey, this is crazy. Can we talk? And they do get a little lip service from NATO with this. So then the biggest NATO expansion, though, in 2004 takes place to date. 7 countries all become members. Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. This is wild. And then in 2008, Ukraine and Georgia say they want to join as well. And the United States is like, cool. And NATO's like, all right, let's go. So in August, Russia wins a short war with Georgia over the breakaway regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, which Moscow recognizes as independent states. So this is very similar to what happens in Ukraine. So in 2009, Croatia and Albania become NATO members. And NATO also then was involved in Libya, in the execution of Gaddafi. So yeah, that's kind of what happens to get us to this point. Right. Now, Russia attempts to de-escalate conflict with NATO this entire time. And so when you understand this, Russia wants to see at the table. An ex-NATO head says Putin wanted to join the alliance early on. George Robertson recalls Russian president did not want to wait in line with other countries that did not matter. Vladimir Putin wanted Russia to join NATO, but did not want his country to have to go through the usual application process and stand in a line with a lot of other countries that don't matter, according to former Secretary General of the Transatlantic Alliance. Now, this might sound cold, but it's actually not. It's an anti-Russia alliance, or it was anyway. Russia's arguably the most important part of anything that happens with NATO. Otherwise, what else is NATO there for? So George Robertson, a former Labor Defense Secretary who led NATO between 1999 and 2003, said Putin made it clear at their first meeting that he wanted Russia to be a part of Western Europe. They wanted to be part of that secure, stable, prosperous West that Russia was out of at the time. It's very obviously true, right? Very obviously true. The Labor peer recalled an early meeting with Putin, who became Russian president in the year 2000. Putin said, "When are you going to invite us to join NATO?" And Robertson said, well, we don't invite people to join NATO. They have to apply to join NATO. And he said, well, we're not standing in line with a lot of countries that don't matter. Le but. The account chimes what Putin told the late David Frost in a BBC interview shortly before his first inaugurated as president more than 21 years ago. Putin told Frost he would not rule out joining NATO if and when Russia's views are taken into account as those of an equal partner. So this is all Russia's wanted, to just have a seat at the table. He told Frost it was hard for him to visualize NATO as an enemy. Russia is a part of the European culture, and I cannot imagine my own country in isolation from Europe and what we often call the civilized world. So, again, Russia wanted to play ball. Lord Robertson's comments on the One Decision podcast, which is presented by Michelle Kosinski, a former CNN journalist, and Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of M16, underscore how Putin's worldview has evolved during his 21 years of unbroken rule of Russia. After the Orange Revolution street protests in Ukraine in 2004, Putin became increasingly suspicious of the West. Yeah, no shit, they staged a fucking coup next door to him, which he blamed for funding pro-democracy NGOs. Yeah, no shit, we admitted we did that. He was further angered by NATO's continued expansion into Central and Eastern Europe. Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Slovenia, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania chose to join the alliance in 2004. Croatia and Albania followed in 2009. Georgia and Ukraine were promised membership in 2008, but still have remained outside. Robertson also recalled how he became the first and only NATO Secretary General to invoke NATO's Collective Defense Clause, known as Article 5, in the wake of 9/11 attacks. Invoking Article 5 was a gamble, and it was far from a foregone conclusion that NATO members would reach for it after a terrorist attack, he said, noting it was designed for an attack by the Soviet Union across the Fulda Gap in Germany. Some NATO allies were uneasy about invoking the Collective Defense Clause to support the U.S., fearing it would give George W. Bush's administration a license to invade Iraq. Robertson recalled one administrator asking him, "Does this mean we're going to give them a blank check to invade Iraq?" We said, "No, it's not." Well, so what did they think it was for? If they're like, it couldn't be used for this. If they're like, okay, the clause is an attack on one is an attack on all, and then the United States gets attacked, and they're like, oh, we didn't think it'd be used for this. What did they think it'd be used for? They thought it'd be used for Russia. They thought it'd be used for Russia. That's why they joined. They thought it'd be used for Russia. The Scottish former minister also revealed how the historic decision to invoke Article 5 nearly went awry. So they talk about this a little bit. It's not so interesting to us necessarily in our story today. All right. So what comes next? Russia tried non-military solutions like sanctions, but lacked the power for these to be effective. So Russia did not start off trying to go to war with the West over NATO. Russia's belief in NATO betrayal and why it matters today. The current confrontation between Russia and the West is fueled by many grievances, but the greatest is the belief in Moscow that the West tricked the former Soviet Union into breaking promises made at the end of the Cold War in 1989 to 1990 that NATO would not expand to the East. In his now famous 2007 speech to the Munich Security Conference, Vladimir Putin accused the West of forgetting and breaking assurances, leaving international law in ruins. And that is true. It matters desperately to Russia, this claim of betrayal, since it fuels distrust, feeds Russia's cynicism about international law, and is the central motive behind Russia's draft security treaties calling for a reversal of NATO's extension due to be discussed on Wednesday at the NATO-Russia Council. The betrayal theory is not confined to Putin. It was supported by Boris Yeltsin from mid-1995 right across the Russian political elite. A new book, Not 1 Inch, America, Russia, and the Making of the Cold War Stalemate by the prize-winning historian Mary Elise Surratt charts all of the private discussions within the Western Alliance and with Russia over enlargement and reveals Russia as powerless to slow the ratchet effect of opening NATO's door. The author concludes the charge of betrayal is technically untrue but has a psychological truth. I mean, it is true. It was never formal, but it's like the whole point of this was that they were going to agree to trust each other moving forward. I said M16, MI6. Fuck. MI6. See, I'm reading so fast. This is why. M16, MI6. It's crazy. Labour, M16. Maybe I'm just on some next level shit you guys don't know about. How about that? The Labour Party and the intelligence of M16. Yeah, that's right. You don't know that yet, do you? You don't know that yet, do you? You'll get there. You will get there. I've been doing a lot of reading today. All right. To my credit, I'm just reading. I'm just brain rot reading. It's not great. I feel like I've made a few more. Eep. See ya in Spanish before. That's so cool. Okay, well, I don't speak Spanish, so I don't have an excuse. And I do know what MI6 is. I know I say I don't know a lot about British politics, but I do know what MI6 is, so I've got no excuses for that. I have no excuses. So, what is the basis of the complaint? At one level, it narrowly focuses both on verbal commitments made by the U.S. Secretary of State James Baker and President George H.W. Bush. If we see it was more than that now. We have the documentation. There's a lot of people telling Russia this would happen. And in terms of a treaty signed on September 12th, 1990, setting out how NATO troops could operate in the territory of former East Germany. So, they go on to explain these promises weren't ever written down. Did Russia see the implications of the 1990 agreement for Warsaw Pact countries? Yes, they opposed the concessions being made at the time by Gorbachev, in part because of the implications for Eastern Europe, but Russia was given those assurances about the limits of NATO's expansion, but no written guarantee. Did Russia complain about the betrayal? Repeatedly. So as early as 1993, we have known Russia was not cool with NATO expansion. that they did view it as a national security risk to them and a threat to them. And they would respond like it was an act of aggression. We've known this since 1993. So the idea that what's going on in Ukraine today has nothing to do with NATO is frankly ridiculous. In 1993, Boris Yeltsin, angling for Russia to join NATO, wrote to President Bill Clinton to argue any further expansion of NATO eastwards breached the spirit of the 1990 treaty. The U.S. State Department, undecided at the time about Poland's call to join NATO, was so sensitive to the charge of betrayal that Clinton-era officials even asked the German Foreign Ministry formally to report on the complaint's merits. The German Foreign Ministry's top aide reported in October 1993 that the complaint was formally wrong, but he could understand why Yeltsin thought that NATO had committed itself not to extend beyond its 1990 limits. Right? So, the purple and the pink are the new additions. So, the blue, okay, that happened when the USSR still existed. The pink is what has been added, pink and purple. They have the same map as us, chat. Getting close to Russia, that they're freaked out about, that they're like, what the fuck is happening? Why are you coming for us? Right? So in 1997, at the time of the NATO-Russia Founding Act, a treaty designed to create a new relationship between the alliance and Russia, Foreign Minister Primakov again raised Baker's double dealing of 6 years earlier. It prompted the then U.S. Secretary of State Warren Christopher to commission an internal report to the claim. The report drew a distinction between side comments made by German politicians, ruling out NATO expansion, and what was agreed on in the treaty. Okay. Russia presented itself as a potential NATO member. The U.S. was like, this is a fantasy that will paralyze the alliance. Why? Because it's an anti-Russia alliance. The U.S. often preferred to deflect rather than reject. The U.S. administration in 1993 could have delayed NATO expansion, but supporters who saw it as a democratic right of the foreign Warsaw Pact countries defeated those who argued it would weaken both Russian support for arms control and forces for reform. So Russia's economy and politics were in ruins. Not 1 inch. And this is, again, the destruction of the USSR was catastrophic for these countries. We saw the single greatest loss in life expectancy ever recorded during this time. So, basically, they were not in a position to be able to handle sanctions or anything like that because of their economy. They didn't have any recourse. There's nothing they could do. So they tried to use different techniques to coax the United States for years into not expanding NATO. This is an article that's 19 years old. Okay? 19 years ago. Putin delivered the strongest attack of a 7-year presidency on the U.S. yesterday, blaming it for fanning conflicts across the world through its unilateral use of hyperforce. And he was right. He said America was seeking to impose its standards on other nations, triggering new arms races and the spread of nuclear weapons, and threatening Russia through new missile shield programs. In a blistering assault that has reflected the Kremlin chief's self-confidence and conviction that he has restored Russia's international clout after years of decline, Putin told a security conference in Munich that America was destroying the international system and seeking to eliminate nuclear deterrence through the uncontained use of its power. One state, the United States, has overstepped its national borders in every way, he told dozens of Western ministers and policymakers, including the U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates and a likely Republican presidential contender, Senator John McCain. So John McCain is going to be really important in the 2013-2014 coup. He comes into play there. This is very dangerous. Nobody feels secure anymore because nobody can hide behind international law, Putin said. This is a nourishing arms race with countries seeking to obtain nuclear weapons. We're witnessing the untrammeled use of military and international affairs. Why is it necessary to bomb and shoot at every opportunity? Now, what you're going to learn from this, reading this, is just how much Russia tried not to have militarized action with anybody. You are going to see Russia constantly being like, can we talk? Can we figure this out? Can we negotiate? And the United States just being like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, shoot to kill. And you'll really get the vibe of this. So after you hear all this, it's hard for you to blame Russia for anything involved in this conflict, right? So the Russian leader accused Washington of plotting to evade its commitments to cut nuclear arsenals already made through U.S.-Russian arms treaties and raged against the Pentagon's plans to site parts of its missile shield project in Poland and the Czech Republic. So why is Putin freaking out? Because, literally the United States is parking a missile shield project in the next door neighbors of Russia, in Poland and the Czech Republic. So how is Russia not expected to feel that this is an act of military aggression? Putin says, I don't want to suspect anyone of aggressiveness, but if the anti-missile defense is not targeted at us, then our new missiles will not be targeted at you. And this is what he says. He's like, okay, fine. So if that's not for us, then I guess you can rest easy because our shit's not for you either. So then don't get mad, right? So the thing about this is that it makes Putin look increasingly rational. He's very rational given the situation at hand. You're reading this and you're like, how are you not like, well, yeah, I'd feel the same way. If you were in Putin's shoes, and honestly ask yourself this, you're in Putin's shoes, you're Russia. You see NATO creeping towards you. You know NATO was founded as an anti-USSR thing. You know you asked to be invited to join NATO as an equal party, as an equal member, after you decided to no longer be communist, to join the capitalists of the world. They said no. And they told you, don't worry. We're not gonna grow. We're not gonna come towards you. You see them creeping towards you every year, a little bit more. And next thing you know, they're putting fucking weapons in your next door neighbor countries. Do you feel threatened by that? Yes or no? Do you feel threatened? Do you decide it's probably not about you? Or are you like, well, they lied to me. They lied to me for a reason, right? Really think about that. What would you do? I don't know what I would do. Very, very interesting. So, the tirade indicated that the Kremlin is gearing up for confrontation with the Americans. I mean, really, the speech, not the tirade, says, we're freaked out you're going to attack us. We will defend ourselves if you do. That's literally what this says. But somehow they have morphed this into Putin being the aggressor, which I think is interesting. So McCain told The Observer the speech was the most aggressive from a Russian leader since the end of the Cold War. I'm sorry, you're parking missiles in neighboring countries. You're refusing to negotiate with this guy. You're breaking all your promises, verbal or whatever, to him. How is that him being aggressive to be like, hey, if you attack us, we'll defend ourselves? Which is literally all he said, right? Very, very fascinating. So, the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, denied that the leader had intended to be aggressive or confrontational, but said the time was right for Putin to throw down the gauntlet. I think so. On several key disputes dominating the international agenda, Putin came out in flat opposition to the Americans. Russia was supplying Iran with defense equipment, for example, so that Tehran did not feel surrounded by enemies. With the U.S. pushing for independence for the Albanian-dominated province of Kosovo in former Yugoslavia, Putin said he would block independence unless Serbia agreed to it. In Russia, he added, Western non-governmental organizations operated as instruments of Western governments, which is true. NGOs, yes, they are. That it is the United States government. He reserved his bitterest complaints, however, for the U.S. drive to expand NATO into former Soviet Eastern Europe and for the plans to deploy parts of the missile shield in Central Europe. Why do you need to move your military infrastructure to our borders? He declared. Right? So this is the real question. Why is the USA, why do they need to move military infrastructure to the borders of Russia? I know, it's noon. We'll finish. We're almost there. This is a fair question. I don't think anybody with a brain cell would think this was an unfair question. Can you imagine if our political enemies moved their military infrastructure to the Canadian and Mexican borders? How we would feel, what we would do. It's very, very rational. Very, very rational. All right, so I do want to finish up the NATO stuff, so we'll go a little bit late today, and then we'll start off next week with Euromaidan and the 2013-2014 coup. So there's just 2-3 more things here that they're pretty fast. In April of 2008, Putin tried to be friendly with NATO again. Okay? What do you say to people who say there was no formal agreement for NATO not to expand? I say, okay, so everything the United States says is full of shit and everybody should just know not to trust them? Is that true? Nobody should ever trust anything the United States says then? The United States just makes shit up all the time? And we're supposed to be okay with that? Is that the argument? I mean, really, ask them. Is the argument that the United States just gets to make shit up all the time and everyone's supposed to be okay with that? Maybe they're like, yeah, that's how it goes in the world. Then it's like, okay, well, you can see why people might not fuck with you then. If I had a friend that just made shit up all the time, I don't think I'd want to be friendly with them either. Right? All right, so I think that's kind of thing. Yeah, only Big Gotko's allowed to just say shit. So, 2008. Despite all of this, Putin is still trying to peacefully negotiate with NATO. Russian President Putin urged NATO to work towards compromise on disputes over enlargement, arms control, and missile defense at a cordial farewell summit on Friday. Putin acknowledged that the, quote, resurrection of a strong independent Russia in his 8 years in office had not made relations easy, but he said his successor, Dmitry Medvedev, had an opportunity to build ties. A 90-minute meeting with U.S. President George W. Bush and other NATO leaders in Bucharest yielded no big breakthroughs on disputes ranging from Kosovo to a planned U.S. missile shield that have dragged ties to a post-Cold War low. But although Putin reaffirmed Russia's fierce opposition to NATO enlargement plans as a potential threat, okay, literally, they're saying, enlarging NATO we will view as a threat to our safety and security. If you do that, we are going to take it as a threat, right? His tone was very different than the searing attacks he launched on Washington and its allies over the past year. Let's be friends, guys, and be frank and open, he said at a news conference, declaring that another Cold War was impossible. Moscow's envoy to NATO, Dmitry Rogozin, said the summit did not issue a joint statement because there remained formulas that were unacceptable to the Russian side, Russian news agency Interfax reported. NATO officials said a joint statement did not always emerge from such NATO-Russia meetings. Putin's appearance marked the first time in 6 years that NATO leaders have invited the Russian leader to a summit and comes a month before he hands over to his protege Medvedev. So they're also going to host Bush, they say, etc. Bush said, we're two old war horses. We're both getting ready to step down from our positions. Blah, 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 blah. But no breakthroughs. So this whole thing is basically just saying that Putin is trying to be friendly with them. So they said they had some talking points here. So German Chancellor Angela Merkel called for more frequent meetings with the Russian leader and said NATO is not against anyone, certainly not Russia. Russia is a partner, but you wouldn't let NATO in, right? Or Russia into NATO, right? Yes, Malrish. My entire Yugoslavia podcast, we talk about Kosovo. So I would say the Yugoslavia pick me up. I'm scared. Also, the Parenti book, To Kill a Nation, Killing a Nation, is about that. Mm-hmm. So both Putin and Merkel said a solution ought to be possible on the stalled treaty curbing conventional forces in Europe. Moscow has suspended its participation, arguing the terms of the pact signed with a crumbling Soviet Union are unfair to it. So this is what's going on. There's a little bit of talk about Ukraine. Behind closed doors, Putin urged NATO to take account some 17 million Russians living in Ukraine, notably in Crimea, and said it's a complex country. He argued that Georgia did not need NATO membership, but dialogue to solve its problems with breakaway regions. Ukrainian President Yushchenko reassured Moscow his country's aim was not directed at its former master, they say, but at Russia. Our state has a full right to choose our own way of development, protect our security and our interests. Our interests are not destined to be against any other country, Yushchenko said. NATO and Russia signed a land transit pact allowing the alliance to deliver non-lethal supplies to troops in Afghanistan across Russian territory. So that's what's going on there. Now, next up, this article from 2011, an iron fist to keep NATO expansion at bay. NATO can survive a fairly long time in its present condition because of the benefits of its participants, especially the Europeans. But being members of the alliance means they don't have to do anything. They are free to spend nothing on defense and able to pretend they are sitting pretty. In reality, Europe is becoming a defenseless continent. So this is, obviously now we see efforts at rearmament, right? Yes. So we're talking here, the Russian president came to the NATO Lisbon summit in an entirely new capacity as a donor of legitimacy. The fact could not but increase interest in the alliance in Russia. The fact that the bloc reported to be developing a new strategic concept only served to add to this interest. Imagine what would happen at the Lisbon session if the Russian President Medvedev had not attended. Everyone would have noticed that the NATO concept is well written but absolutely meaningless. So they're talking about this and how they need to negotiate with Russia, etc., etc. How much longer will NATO exist? If Russia joined NATO, I would say that it would exist for many more years to come. It would become a bulwark of genuine security. Even in its present condition, NATO can survive a fairly long time because it remains beneficial for its European participants. They're talking about Barack Obama. Its conventional wisdom says, this is from the interviewer, it's Americans who need NATO most of all. We used to say it was Americans who needed NATO, but then we also said we would have a communist paradise in 20 or 30 or 40 years' time, and sometimes we're mistaken. The Europeans need the alliance much more than the Americans did. NATO meant the Europeans could spend less money on defense to live happily. It was the Europeans, he says, that benefited most through NATO. So why would Russia want to join NATO, even hypothetically speaking? The interviewer asks, why should Russia want to prolong the life of that organization? And he says there are two scenarios open to us in guaranteeing our security. One is to create something similar to an alliance with Europe, to forge an alliance between the European Union and Russia. The other is to join NATO. It should be noted that NATO has no binding commitments to shore up mutual security. If, for example, somebody attacks Malta, it does not mean that Russian soldiers would have to fight to defend it. Article 5 of the treaty, directed by isolationist-minded American senators, does not contain any binding obligations on security. So they're talking about this. NATO expansion mainly concerns Ukraine. This is the important part of this from 2011. And this is Russians talking, Russian government officials saying Ukraine is what concerns them. Most strategists believe that NATO expansion into Ukraine is something Russia would view as absolutely unacceptable because it would then become a vital threat. In political jargon, this kind of threat means war. I exerted considerable efforts to prevent NATO expansion and prevent Russia from signing the Russia-NATO Founding Act, which legitimized further NATO expansion. This was not about depriving Lithuania, Latvia, let alone Poland, Romania, and other countries from their right to join NATO. We said the expansion was inadmissible when it came to bringing Ukraine into the bosom of the alliance. Eventually, we had to confront the issue. Why do we believe that Ukraine joining NATO is something we simply cannot countenance? The reasons are many. To begin with, Russia would have 2,000 kilometers of unprotected and indefensible borders. We do not know how the alliance will change in the future. When Russia was very weak and barely existed as a state, NATO, which had been a defensive alliance throughout the Cold War, transformed itself into an offensive alliance. It attacked Yugoslavia in 1995 and again in 1999. The organization's leader, the United States, attacked Iraq. So it would help to deny the alliance any such opportunity. The second reason why NATO expansion into Ukraine is inadmissible is that any such expansion would inevitably sharpen the confrontation between Western and Eastern Ukraine. And again, remember, Ukraine, pretty divided at this time. We'd been pumping all that propaganda money in. People in the East were less susceptible to it. People in the West were more susceptible to it. So part of what Russia is saying is this would also create a civil war, a conflict in Ukraine that would leave Ukraine divided if they pursue NATO membership. So this is what they're talking about here. It would trigger civil conflicts into which Russia would automatically be drawn. This is perhaps the most important thing that Russia has said. This was back in what, 2011? Yeah, 2011. Russia is telling the future. Russia is saying what will end up happening from 2014 to 2022 in Ukraine. Russia is saying that it will sharpen the confrontation between Western and Eastern Ukraine, which Russia understands psychologically to be very divided, and trigger civil conflicts in Ukraine into which Russia will automatically be drawn. This is exactly what happens. This is exactly what happens, which most people don't understand. And last but not least, it is impossible to imagine a situation where there is no normal border between NATO and Russia. That is a border that is not merely a line on a map. Border demarcation would cause tens, hundreds, and perhaps thousands of conflicts because every mound, every tree in this situation would be treated as a historical question, and we would be back wrangling over every 10 to 20 or 30 meters of land. That problem alone, I mean here demarcation, could provoke hundreds of conflicts and the broader deterioration of our relations with Ukraine. Therefore, the main threat posed to us by NATO is not military. The main threat is its expansion. One can cooperate with NATO. Today it is a military weak alliance with which we share many interests. So this is what they're trying to do. So this person says, is the current level of relations between Russia and NATO sufficient to prevent the bloc from expanding into Ukraine? And they're like, maybe not, probably not. They're like, what about Georgia? And, Georgia is like, whatever, not a big deal to them. Ukraine is the biggest issue. And they explain why. So they're correct in how they explain this. And it's exactly what happens. Russia's known all along what was going to happen. And they tried to avoid it a number of times. And they were very vocal about what would happen with the West, and the West did not try to avoid it at all. Now, the last thing we have here is Russia, again, making it clear they see NATO expansion as a national security threat and try to avoid it at all costs. This is a conversation, a meeting between Matthew Chant and Vladimir Putin. Right? CNN interviews Russian Prime Minister of Vladimir Putin. So let's just look. This will be the last document we read today. And we'll get into Ukraine. So he says, countries like Ukraine have big ethnic Russians populations, Moldova, Central Asian states, some of the Baltic states. Can you guarantee that Russia will never use military force against a neighboring state? And Putin says, I am categorically opposed to the way this question is formulated. It is not we who should guarantee we will not attack anybody. We have not attacked anyone. It is we who are demanding guarantees from others that they will not attack us anymore and kill our citizens. And yet there are attempts to portray us as the aggressor. Now, after everything we've read, we have not seen Russia do anything aggressive. The closest thing they got to aggression is when they said, hey, if your missiles aren't designed for us, then ours aren't designed for you. But like, we're kind of sketched out. So the most they've ever done is assure that they will defend themselves from the West. So Putin is correct to say, why are you trying to position us as an aggressor? We're not aggressive. We're not the aggressive ones here. I have here the chronology of the events that took place on August 7th, 8th, and 9th. So let's look at the actual year that this happens is 2008, okay? So, where are we? Hold on. Okay, I'm here. The Georgian officers who were at the headquarters of the Joint Peacekeeping Force left it, walked away from the headquarters where there were our servicemen as well as Georgian and Ossetian servicemen. So this is about the Georgia incident. They left their post, left our servicemen there alone and did not return until the start of hostilities. An hour later, heavy artillery shelling started. So he talks about what's going on here. As I've already stated in public, Georgia told me that nobody wanted a war. We hoped the U.S. administration would interfere in this conflict and stop the aggressive actions of the Georgian leadership, but this did not happen, right? So again, he's like, we tried to avoid going to war with Georgia. We were abandoned. Nobody came in to try to do diplomatic relations to ease the tension between us and Georgia. You don't want that. So he says, what place does Russia reserve for itself in the world? How does it see itself? What is its place? We are a peace-loving state, and we want to cooperate with our neighbors and our partners. But if someone thinks that they can come and kill us, that our place is at the cemetery, these people should think about the consequences of such a policy for themselves. So again, this is defensive. Everything they're saying is defensive, right? Russia's struggling with sanctions. They're struggling a little bit, yeah. So we'll see. The partnerships with Iran, that's helpful, but yeah. So, they're going on to talk about this. Let's see if there's more NATO. Yeah. I don't see why the United States allies should support one American party against the other in an election campaign. This would be dishonest to the American people. Think about this in contrast to what the United States does in campaigns of politics. So, then we get into the issue of NATO expansion. And he's talking about, again, we must take a broader view of this conflict. I think you and your audience would be interested to learn a little bit more about the history of relations between the peoples and ethnic groups in this part of the world, because people know little or nothing about this. So what he's talking about is how these places joined the Russian Empire of their own free will, but like a long, long time ago, like 1700s, right? And there's a lot of different ethnic groups here going on. Stalin was a man from Georgia. When the Soviet Union was formed, Stalin made Georgia an official territory of the USSR. He says something funny here. He says those who insist that those territories should continue to belong to Georgia are Stalinists. Putin's not a communist, right? They defend a decision made by Joseph Stalin and whatever. He goes on to talk about this. But he's basically saying, like, in all of this, what he's saying is, you don't understand that there's a lot of ethnic conflict and tension in this area, that a lot of these alliances, a lot of these countries were being held together very tenuously, and anything that might exacerbate these ethnic tensions will explode into conflict. Now, we saw this happen in Yugoslavia. This is how the Bosnian genocide occurred, right? The USSR had kept multiple different ethnic groups together under the framework of Marxist-Leninism through the right to self-determination for oppressed people. Yugoslavia had done the same. Once NATO came in, stripped down Yugoslavia, broke it apart for spare parts, and then these breakaway states became capitalist. Well, next thing you know, those capitalist countries without that Marxist-Leninist framework of right to self-determination for oppressed people, they start killing each other, right? And that's how we got the Bosnian genocide. So what Putin is talking about is kind of a similar concept. He's like, there are ethnic tensions in these regions that are tenuous. He talks about how Ukraine has a lot of ethnic Russians there, right? And he's like, yeah, like, you don't understand how complicated this can be. That's kind of the whole vibe here, right? That's it. So he gives this whole interview about this, and he talks a little bit about what's going on in the world and how the United States is kind of meddling, and he makes it clear multiple times that, hold on. There we go, that's fine. That NATO expansion is going to be a threat, and is going to be a problem, not just for them, but also for Ukraine. So that's where we're going to end today. We'll get back into this on Topics Tuesday next week. We'll pick up with Euromaidan and the 2013-2014 coup. So the thing we should be able to take from all of this is that the United States meddling in Ukraine is nothing new. That we've been very, very involved in fostering, in particular, far right-wing elements of Ukrainian culture at every opportunity. That Our political success and economic success is very contingent upon developing Ukraine into a place that's open for military and open for business to enhance the United States and our agenda there, right? So we should know that Russia has always said NATO expansion would lead to war and conflict and would be a bad idea. And that the United States has ignored this, and that this doesn't come out of nowhere. We should understand that Russia tried to avoid this happening since 1990. And we frankly don't care. So that's kind of what we should take away from all of this. And the idea that NATO is not a factor in Ukraine, I don't know how you can believe that when Putin is out here telling you in the year 2008, whatever, Ukraine and NATO are factors in our ability to coexist with our neighbors, right? So, okay. What do we think? What's up? What did I miss? How's everybody doing? He was just playing the long game. Ukrainians are fighting to be free from the U.S. controlled government right now. I don't think that's true. Ukrainians aren't fighting against the U.S. controlled government. They're not at all. No. Ukrainians aren't at all. The U.S. controlled government in Ukraine that took control in 2013 and 2014, they are the ones that are kidnapping Ukrainians actually off the street to send them to this war with Russia. The war with Russia that could have been avoided through negotiations, but Ukraine and the United States refused to negotiate with Russia over it for a number of years. Also worth pointing out, pursuing NATO membership and more close relationships with the EU did exactly what Putin said it would do. It divided Ukraine. Ukraine had civil war and civil conflict over it. The Euromaidan protests were the far right who wanted to align with Europe and the United States, starting basically a civil war in Ukraine to take control, and they did. And the areas of Ukraine that were not comfortable being controlled by far right neo-Nazis who wanted to ethnically cleanse them, as Putin explained to everybody, there were a lot of ethnic Russians there. So having a group of people who wanted to kill ethnic Russians in power and in control of your country obviously led to civil conflict, just like Putin said it would. And those areas opted to secede from Ukraine and join Russia instead when the new government took hold. These were never considered by the West, even considered to potentially be real and credible attempts at cessationist movements for their own survival, independence movements. When you think about how much credence we give the Taiwanese independence movement, when only 4% of the people in that area want to immediately secede from China. Now think about, most Americans don't even know that there was an independence movement in the Donbas region, that they proclaimed, the two different republics proclaimed independence from Ukraine, tried to secede because they were unhappy with the government after the coup during the Civil War. Most Americans don't even know that. Most Americans don't understand how Crimea ended up in Russia. Crimea did not end up in Russia because Russia just took Crimea. Crimea is mostly ethnic Russians who were being targeted by the new super right-wing neo-Nazi government after the coup and started attacking them. And we'll get into that. We'll see that. So what's actually happening in Ukraine right now is a civil war. It's a civil war that Russia joined in on. As they said, we will be forced to join in on this because what will happen is ethnic Russians will be targeted in this and they will ask for our help. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. The United States sparked a civil war in Ukraine, and the far right won. And the people who were the victims of that far right neo-Nazi agenda obviously took issue with it. They tried to fight back. They tried to fight for their independence. They tried to leave. And when that became hard, they asked Russia for help. And that's how Russia got drawn into this. And that's what happened. Yeah. Very, very interesting. Why did other regions not do the same if Donbas has so much sovereignty? What do you mean? What do you mean by other regions and doing the same? California governor primaries today. Ukraine's memory wars. Common weird win from the K. This is the libertarians being right on foreign policy once in a while. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Maybe I'll add this to the resource doc. Yeah, does anybody else have any questions about Ukraine and the situation going on there? Yeah, moral of the story is never trust the USA. Yeah. Yeah, everyone in Ukraine does, almost every, I think like 80% of people there, I'm pretty sure, speak Russian. So, yeah, the analogy I always give is this. Imagine, I'm trying to think. Imagine the state of California doesn't have like any autonomy, basically. Imagine that we are subjugated to the will of the federal government only, Donald Trump. Think about ICE coming into California. Now imagine that California has no sovereignty politically, and ICE is kidnapping not just immigrants, like, you know, and we know they don't just kidnap immigrants, but imagine ICE now is like, we're actually targeting anyone who we think might be Mexican or brown. Anybody with a last name we don't like, anybody who looks a little brown on the street, and we're fighting them, and we're trying to get them to leave. We're telling them to get out of here. This is our territory. You're not welcome here anymore. So imagine the situation with ICE is amplified in Southern California to an insane amount, to just like even worse, so much worse than what you've been seeing. And California has no power really to stop them. Think about how realistic it would be that parts of Southern California or parts of Southern, like the southern border that's shared with Mexico in, I don't know, other nearby states, even like Texas, might be like, you know what? We actually would just like to become a part of Mexico now because this is fucking ridiculous. You know, it's not unfeasible. It's not unfeasible that parts of San Diego in that situation might want to become a part of Mexico. And that's exactly what happened in Ukraine. That's so funny about the fucking Cato Institute. It's interesting. Oh, Georgia. Okay, that will have to be a different time, but we could talk about that. So, yeah. How do we come to the Cyprus issue with U.S. involvement and intervention by Turkey? You know, I think it's the same playbook we do everywhere. Turkey's so interesting. I'm very curious to see how Turkey shifts up on things. But I do think it's the same. We do the same playbook everywhere. So to compare these situations is, yeah. Were the Nazis in the Donbas region targeting Russians from the Ukrainian government, or were they just militias working independent for the government, or a mix of both? So, great question. So, it was actually confusing. And the EU and NATO were like, you got to clear this up, Ukraine. Are these militias your government or not? What the fuck's going on? And nobody knew. Nobody knew, really. And the Ukrainian government certainly wasn't stopping them. Some of the people that were leaders of these things were in government posts in the Ukrainian government. So we'll see that this actually becomes a source of contention and confusion for everybody, and nobody quite knows what to do. Yeah. So, very interesting. Any other questions before we wrap up today and send you to Larry? I know we ran 30 minutes late. But I think it's cool to get to go through this. And, you know, you guys feel like some of you learned a few things interesting. Like the Proud Boys. Yeah, it's like the Proud Boys. And this is what I tell people. Imagine the January 6th protest riot was successful and they won. Imagine January 6th won. That's the new government of Ukraine since 2013, 2014. So when they say, so you agree with the Russian invasion of sovereign territory? You know, I think the first question is you ask them. When 2022 or 2014, you know, also though, you don't have to, like, my thing I always say is I'm like, I don't love war. I wish Russia would have done something else. I don't know what they should have done differently. Do you? And they're going to be like, yeah, just not do anything. And then you have to be like, well, are you aware of the civil war and the independence movement and the Donbas region asking for Russia's help to defend them as the civil war went on? Or do you know there was a civil war there? So what were they supposed to do? Just not support the Donbas region? Or, like, I don't understand. So most liberals don't know anything about this. Most liberals do not know that there was a civil war there, that they don't even know there's a coup. Some of them will straight up tell you that wasn't a coup. And you're like, fucking braid lady Timoshenko was like, this was a coup. Like, anybody with half a brain cell knows this is a coup. What are you talking about? No, Donbas wasn't the only area that wanted to secede. Crimea wanted to secede, and they did. And Donbas is two regions, so Luhansk and Donetsk, I think is how it's pronounced. They both wanted to secede. So Donbas is kind of like the general grouping of both of those. And I wouldn't say they wanted to secede necessarily, but like, what, Odessa? Odessa had a lot of conflict, and we'll talk about that in the document as well. I think I made a little Odessa section. Yeah, I did here. Let me get this here. So there's an Odessa section in here. And Odessa is relevant because they slaughtered 48 leftists in Odessa. The right-wing government did. It was very, very major. Also, there was the Battle of Mariupol, which I believe happened in, where was the Mariupol? I have to, my brain, you guys know me and my geography. I'm looking it up. Yeah. So that was in the Donbass region. Mariupol was kind of a unique situation too, because Mariupol, a lot of people there didn't want to secede. And so that was like a big point of conflict in Mariupol. I should save them all. You're right. Because that's very sad that we lost that one. You're right. Yeah, when people say that, you ask if you think the U.S. would be justified in invading Canada if China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran was using Canada to mess with the U.S. for decades and wanted to put nukes along the border. In my experience, they often say yes. I think that's a really good way to do it, Strashito. Yeah. Do you think that the United States would have the right to go there to dismantle those military assets that were targeting us? That's very good. Yeah. Yeah, there's a reason many stayed when Russia came to liberate, most of them. And we'll watch some video footage, too, in this document. Odessa is also a city in Texas. Yeah, that's true. I think this is also a good exercise for me, because I'm like, some of these things are like superfluous. Like, I could get rid of the interview we just went over. It wasn't like super necessary, and it did repeat a lot of things. So like, we could get rid of that. Yeah, so I almost want to like warn people to like, hey, this is a Russian source, but this is why. It's like giving us the perspective of Russia, which we need. Yeah. Okay. Russia folder. I know I need to, you're right. Okay. So we got there. We're going to talk about Euromaidan next week. Hopefully it'll go faster from here on out. I hope. Maybe it won't. It is a lot though. It's a lot to get through, right? And there is a lot of, like, look at how much stuff there is. So this is all about Euromaidan and the 2013-2014 coup. Then we have the role of the USA in Maidan. Then we have the post-coup Ukrainian right-wing government, what was going on. And you'll see there's a lot of things. Like, there's a paramilitary problem. Who are these people? Is this your new government? Or are these just some random Nazis you got running around? What's up with that? Actions they took to ban communism, ban left-wing politics. They started getting mad at people for calling their Nazis neo-Nazis. And then we get into what happened in Crimea. That's a segment. What happened in the Donbass, the civil war. What happened in Odessa. And then what ultimately led to war in 2022. Yeah, it's really, really thorough. Okay, so the country on the map for tomorrow. We'll return to map tomorrow. I like Topics Tuesday. I think it's nice. We got a lot of days. Here, you know? It's kind of nice. Let's see what we'll talk about tomorrow on the map. Tomorrow on the map, do you guys want to do Mongolia? And then we can complete this little region. I think we should do Mongolia. Let's do Mongolia. I already know what Mongolia is going to be. But it's okay. We'll do it together still. Mongolia's got treacherous energy. For Iran, I don't think I do. I just have my sources on my podcast episode about Iran. So if you look up Iran so far away. For Big Beep, I'm Scared, the resources are the sources for that if you look in the description. So Topics Tuesday, we're going to start to do these just to like go through the resource documents in detail, so people can learn more if they want to, if they want it in a video format, if they want to see things and we can talk about them. Yeah, I have a podcast. Yeah, the podcast is called Pick Me Up, I'm Scared. Episodes come out almost every Monday, but lately, David's got some stuff going on in his personal life. I think I told you guys, David's mom's really, really sick, and it's very, very hard. So we've been a little less consistent with the recording, but we'll get back to it. It's just it's very tricky right now. Pick Me Up, I'm Scared. Pick Me Up, I'm Scared, as Hegel's Big Dialectical said. Yes. Yeah, check it out. There's a lot of episodes. I think there's like 150 episodes. They're deep dives, like 8 hours on a topic, 6 hours on a topic. Yeah, I know. David's family, it's a lot going on right now. So, we are going to do something special this week. Do you guys know, for all the comic book nerds, do you know, what's it called? Collective Action. What is it called? Something with a K. It's the Comic Book Communist Podcast. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Collective? Is that what it... No, that's something else, huh? Comics. Is that what it's called? I follow it. Hold on. I'm going to look. I'm going to tell you the name for real. This is the most informative history class you've ever taken? Yes, that's what I want. Okay, wait. I think it's something action. Let me double check. My memory's so bad. You guys know my memory. You guys know my memory is bad. Yeah, Collective Action. Yes. So Collective Action Comics, Secret Communist Headquarters. So this is a podcast that is all about comic books and communism. So for our Patreon, we're going to interview the creator of this podcast and talk about comics and communism and how they've been interacting with each other. Yeah, Collective Action Comics. So you guys should listen to that if you like comics and communism. I think it would be good to get into. Yeah, so we're going to do that for our Patreon. So you'll get some bonus content. I think we're going to record that this weekend, maybe. How do I remember all this foreign policy stuff? Your memory's bad? Okay, so I remember stories. So I can remember a narrative of things happening. This happened that led to this, which led to this, which led to this. Like a cause and effect is easy. But you'll see, I get years off the top of my head, 10 years or so. I get proper names of things. I'm like, yeah, it was one of the Republicans. Bush. Nixon, Reagan. So you'll see the proper nouns and the dates do get a little muddy for me, but I remember the cause and effect and the events that occur. Yeah, so that's how that goes. The Patreon's $3 a month. I think there's some $2 a month slots open right now. So it's $2 or $3 a month. Yeah. And there's a lot of old content on there. There's a Susie Kim book club on there. We read like all of Susie Kim together. The Everyday Life in the North Korean Revolution. Yeah. Patreon's really cheap. It's really, really, really cheap. Yeah. And we're not super consistent on it, so that's why it's so cheap. But there is a backlog of stuff on there, and you've had it for forever. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. It is helpful for us. Yeah. That's the only way our podcast is monetized, so we appreciate it. And we don't post on there a lot, but it is like a way to appreciate the podcast, so we like that. But we do post on there, and we should be better. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fun. And you can get the exclusive on your regular podcast app. Yeah, so lots of times we'll do exclusive little bonus content that goes along with whatever our topic is that we're talking about on the main. How far are we with that book? So we finished it a while, but it's all up. So you can go through in order. You can even, if you're halfway through the book or whatever, you can jump in. Every chapter is its own episode. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do video versions sometimes so you can see David. I don't know. Okay, so my original internet presence is literally a superhero reference. It's Jean Grey. But Grey is spelled like gray goods, like the materials used to make clothes. Greige. But I actually, the only comics I really, really loved growing up were like Archie comics, Josie and the Pussycats comics, Betty Veronica, Jughead, all that stuff. Those are the only comics I really regularly read. I would read other ones sometimes, but those are the ones that I was like, oh, every issue. Like, I'm getting these. So I really like those. Big Gakko mod eligibility. Ha 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 ha. Sometimes it might be fun just to see what's happening. Just to see what would happen. What would Big Gakko do? Okay, I'm going to send you all to Larry. I'm late. I'm so late. I'm 40 minutes late. Fuck. I knew I'd be a little weird because it's election day today, but still. Okay, I got to get over there. All right, so let's send you on your way to your raid. Your little raidie. Am I spelling it right? Yes. I say hail Satan. I have no patience for those people. I need to get my patience for them back. To be a communist is to be patient. I need it. I need to get there. Okay. Have a good one, guys. See you tomorrow.